What have Latter-day Prophets taught about evolution, presented by Loyal to the Word? Now, before you get too horrified with the length of this presentation, and I know it's long, but it's also very interesting. So if you are interested in this topic, you are going to really enjoy this presentation. And it's also the most comprehensive thing I think you will find on the internet, and also in a digestible format as a video. You don't have to read a whole bunch. It's going to be very much worth your while. What shall be our standard of truth? So a few quotes to kick off the tenor of this presentation. We have no right to take the theories of men, however scholarly, however learned, and set them up as a standard and try to make the gospel bow down to them, making of them an iron bedstead upon which God's truth, if not long enough, must be stretched out, or if too long, must be chopped off. Anything to make it fit into the system of men's thoughts and theories. On the contrary, we should hold up the gospel as the standard of truth and measure thereby the theories and opinions of men. Orson F. Whitney. There will never be a majority of the Council of the 12 on the wrong side at any time. The Lord has chosen them. He has given them specific responsibilities, and those people who stand close to them will be safe. Spencer W. Kimball. I will give you a key that will never rust. If you will stay with the majority of the 12 apostles and the records of the church, you will never be led astray. Joseph Smith. This presentation is a follow-up to my earlier video, Are There Scriptural Problems with Evolution?, which discussed 35 scriptural problems with evolution, as well as some common objections from LDS evolutionists. This video is another very long but very interesting and very important presentation that will cover rather comprehensively what the prophets and apostles have taught regarding evolution throughout the history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, to give the viewer a sense of how they should feel about the matter. A brief perusal of the teachings of the prophets, those of the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12, will show that there has been a very consistent voice on the matter of evolution. At no time have the prophets taught that evolution, the theory of man evolving from lower animals, is true. At no time. But rather they have been consistent in denouncing evolution as false. The presentation will be broken up into 5 major sections. First, we'll have the days of the prophet Joseph Smith, then the early brethren through the 19th century, third, the first half of the 20th century, then the latter half of the 20th century, and then into the 21st century. Note that this presentation will give particular emphasis and deference to those who were ordained apostles, being prophets, seers, and revelators. Other church leaders, however notable, like B.H. Roberts, are not considered as carrying the same weight with their opinions. And before we move on, I want to make especially clear to viewers that in no case do I mean any disrespect to any apostle, which is a prophet, seer, and revelator, and an anointed servant of the Lord Jesus Christ. We don't do that at Loyal to the Word, ever. We only have love, respect, and reverence for all of the prophets and apostles, and we cherish and appreciate each one for their unique contributions. As we show reverence for the prophets and apostles, we show reverence to the Holy One who called them. If there ever is a divergence of opinion between them and I, it is with the utmost respect. In such rare cases, I make it my personal policy and practice to merely point out the scriptural reasons why I might disagree on a specific point, and then I leave it at that. No disparagement of them will be tolerated by me, and it particularly disgusts me when I find individuals doing that because they don't like a teaching that was taught. So since this is a discussion about evolution and teachings of the prophets regarding evolution, it's very important that we first clearly define our terms so that people know what we're talking about. Some very important terms that will be important for this presentation, first of all, are microevolution. And this is variation within the different kinds of animals. So within the kinds, simple variation within them. So for example, there are a large variety of dogs, but in the final analysis, whether they are large, small, fluffy, or pudgy, they are still all dogs. This variation within the dog kind is called microevolution, and it is observable and entirely factual. Everybody agrees on this part. This is not controversial. Everybody agrees that microevolution is an observable thing. So where's the controversy? The controversy is with macroevolution, this other concept that goes beyond microevolution. Macroevolution is the change from one kind of organism into a completely different kind of creature. So for example, dinosaurs changing into birds over millions of years, or apes or ape-like creatures evolving into man. Such fundamental changes from one kind to another are usually what are meant when discussing evolution and the theory of Darwinism that all life descended slowly from a single-celled organism. This macroevolution, however, has not been observed ever. No one has ever documented a case of this happening. It has never been seen by scientists. It has to be believed in. When we're talking about scriptural problems with evolution, we're referring to macroevolution. And so when we're talking about the prophets' teachings regarding evolution as well, we're talking about macroevolution unless otherwise stated. So microevolution, macroevolution. Evolutionists constantly try to prove macroevolution true by citing examples of microevolution. It is actually quite an underhanded deception because they never offer direct evidence of macroevolution, only examples of microevolution, and then act as though macroevolution is thereby proved. If you find this maneuver being pulled on you, you just stop and think, okay, wait a minute, and then listen very carefully to what is being said. You should be aware that this form of reasoning by evolutionists displays the argument fallacy of equivocation, in which the word evolution is used in two different senses. And that's what we have in the cartoon here on the right. The professor's telling the kid, he says, I see evolution happening in my lab all the time. It's a fact. And what he's actually talking about is, microevolutionary changes in variety of butterflies. And the kid is thinking in his mind, macroevolutionary changes. And that's also what the professor is implying by, making that claim that, oh yeah, well, this kind of evolution is the same as that kind of evolution. But they're not the same. They are different. Evolutionists say that the only difference between microevolution and macroevolution is time, but this association of time is based on belief. They believe that that's the case, that if you just wait long enough and have enough microevolutionary changes that over time you will see macroevolution. That's all just a belief of theirs. Meanwhile, there is a very real difference in kind or category between these two ideas, microevolution and macroevolution. They are different categories of change over time. The days of the prophet Joseph Smith. What was taught that might affect our thoughts on evolution? Joseph Smith died on June 27, 1844, and so he was not contemporary with the theory of evolution, since Darwin's Origin of Species was published in 1859. Had the prophet been contemporary with Origin of Species, there is little doubt that he would have commented on it and contradicted its claims. How can we say this? Well, the prophet assured us, I could go back and trace every subject of interest concerning the relationship of God to man if I had time. I can enter into the mysteries. I can enter largely into the eternal worlds. He also said, I am learned and know more than all the world put together. The Holy Ghost does, anyhow, and he is within me and comprehends more than all the world, and I will associate myself with him. Joseph Smith the prophet also declared, I know the scriptures and understand them. And he stated unequivocally, I believe in the fall of man as recorded in the Bible. Interestingly, while the prophet was not contemporary with Charles Darwin's Origin of Species, he did teach unequivocally truths which essentially falsify the thesis of that book. Recall that according to Darwinism, all life forms evolved from a single-celled organism, which slowly branched out into different kinds of creatures through the ages. But the prophet Joseph Smith taught us in no uncertain terms that life does not do that. It does not transcend the general kinds which God has created in the beginning. He said, God has made certain decrees which are fixed and immovable. For instance, God set the sun, the moon, and the stars in the heavens and gave them their laws, conditions, and bounds which they cannot pass except by his commandments. They all move in perfect harmony in their sphere and order and are as lights, wonders, and signs unto us. The sea also has its bounds which it cannot pass. God has set many signs on the earth as well as in the heavens. For instance, the oak of the forest, the fruit of the tree, the herb of the field, all bear a sign that a seed hath been planted there. For it is a decree of the Lord that every tree, plant, and herb bearing seed should bring forth of its kind, and cannot come forth after any other law or principle. The prophet also taught that life does not come from non-living matter, as evolution ultimately claims. According to Darwinism, the first single-celled organism arose from non-living matter in a warm little pond. This can be called spontaneous generation. But the prophet taught us, where was there ever a son without a father? And where was there ever a father without first being a son? Whenever did a tree or anything spring into existence without a progenitor? And everything comes in this way. There is no such thing as spontaneous generation. Joseph Smith taught that life must come from already existing life, and that it cannot transcend the general kind of life that it belongs to. Both of these concepts undermine Darwin's theory of evolution. If Joseph Smith was a true prophet, we must accept that Darwin's theory is wrong. Now, before we leave the prophet Joseph Smith, we should discuss a very interesting and strange anomaly that has confused some people, and we're going to explain it right now. On Sunday, April 28, 1844, the prophet recorded in his journal the following. My brother Hiram preached at the stand in the morning, and among other things said the time will shortly come that when one man makes another an offender for a word, he shall be cut off from the church of Jesus Christ. He then says, there were prophets before Adam, and Joseph has the spirit and power of all the prophets. So that came from Hiram Smith and was recorded by Joseph Smith the prophet. What could this mean? Certainly not that there were people living on earth before Adam, for both the prophet Joseph Smith himself and the scriptures all indicate that Adam was the first man. For instance, he taught, commencing with Adam, who was the first man, who is spoken of in Daniel as being the Ancient of Days, or in other words, the first and oldest of all, the great grand progenitor, of whom it is said in another place he is Michael, because he was the first and father of all. So that's kind of a short phrase, and in that phrase he said that Adam was the first man about 5 or 6 different ways. So it's pretty clear what he's trying to say. I don't know how he could say it any different, that it could come across any clearer. No doubt then this phrase is referring to the pre-existence, where the prophets lived before the earth was made, and who were assembled in the grand council in heaven, and where God ordained them to be prophets. The Lord certified this to the prophet Jeremiah in the Old Testament. It says, "Then the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Before I formed thee in the belly, I knew thee, and before thou camest forth out of the womb, I sanctified thee, and I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations." So before the earth was created. Is there additional evidence that this phrase refers to the pre-existence? There is another scripture which talks about a specific individual who was before Adam, and in this scripture the phrase has particular reference to the pre-existence. "The devil was before Adam, for he rebelled against me, saying, Give me thine honor, which is my power. And also a third part of the hosts of heaven turned he away from me because of their agency." We don't know the premortal identity of the prophet Joseph Smith, but he did remark, "Would to God I could tell you who I am and what I know." You don't know me. You never knew my heart. No man knows my history. I cannot tell it. I shall never undertake it. So clearly he was much greater than I think a lot of us really appreciate. And he couldn't tell us. I guess it wasn't open for him to be able to tell us. It is my belief that the prophet Joseph Smith is one of the 7 mighty archangels of heaven, spoken of in the Apocrypha and Jewish literature. Perhaps he is Uriel, Phanuel, or Metatron. We know such angels as these exist because one of them, Raphael, is recorded as having visited the prophet Joseph Smith and given him priesthood keys in the Doctrine and Covenants. It would not be surprising if he, the prophet Joseph Smith, were directly under Gabriel or Noah in authority. It has been recorded. President Snow reported that on one occasion Joseph Smith was once asked who he was. The prophet smiled kindly upon his interlocutor and replied, "Noah came before the flood. I have come before the fire." Joseph Smith taught us something relative to the hierarchy that existed among these great angels in the pre-existence. For instance, he said, Christ is the great high priest, Adam next. The priesthood was first given to Adam. He is Michael the archangel, spoken of in the scriptures. Then to Noah, who is Gabriel. He stands next in authority to Adam in the priesthood. So keeping this in mind, how Noah, who is Gabriel, has a similar role to the prophet Joseph Smith, because Noah, or Gabriel, came before the flood, and Joseph Smith the prophet has come before the fire. Joseph Smith did not tell us who is next in authority in the priesthood under Gabriel, but it is reasonable to believe that Joseph Smith himself, who was like Gabriel, Noah, in the divine calling, would be directly under Gabriel in authority, and that this is how Joseph Smith had the spirit of all the prophets which were before Adam, being one of the very chief among them in the pre-existence. The early brethren through the 19th century, what did they say about evolution when it came out contemporaneously with their lives? Since the days of the prophet Joseph Smith, when Darwin's book exploded onto the scene, the brethren of the church through the 19th century had not been shy about denouncing its theories. A person should consider, and LDS evolutionists especially, if Darwin's theory was the incredible ray of light and truth that evolutionists claim it was, then why did God's authorized servants so uniformly reject it upon its outset? I mean, really, that's a great question. After Charles Darwin's book, Origin of Species, was published, we had two presidents of the church living contemporaneously within the lifetime of Darwin, and that would be Brigham Young and John Taylor. Both of them rejected his theory. President Brigham Young declared his unalterable opposition to the theory of evolution and lamented that it was being taught in Zion. He wrote, "We have had enough and to spare at present in these mountains of schools where young infidels are made because the teachers are so tender-footed that they dare not mention the principles of the gospel to their pupils, but have no hesitancy in introducing into the classroom the theories of Huxley, of Darwin. This course I am resolutely and uncompromisingly opposed to, and I hope to see the day when the doctrines of the gospel will be taught in all our schools, when the revelations of the Lord will be our texts." Consider how far Brigham Young University has departed from the wishes and vision of its great founder. If you know anything about the biology faculty in Brigham Young University, you know that they are actively trying to convince the students of Darwinism and evolution actively. President Brigham Young also taught publicly relative to the theory of evolution. The whole scriptures plainly teach us that we are the children of that God who framed the world. Let us look around and see whether we can find a father and a son in this congregation. Do we see one an elephant and the other a hen? No. Does a father that looks like a human being have a son like an ape, going on all fours? No. The son looks like his father. There is an endless variety of distinction in the few features that compose the human face. Yet children have in their countenances and general expression of figure and temperament a greater or less likeness of their parents. You do not see brutes spring from human beings. Every species is true to its kind. The children of men are featured alike and walk erect. The Bible clearly teaches us that we are the children of the very being who framed this earth and peopled it. The foregoing statement by President Young clearly acknowledges microevolution, that's observable variations among the kinds of animals, but just as flatly denies macroevolution, that's theoretical changes from one basic kind of animal to a different kind. Without splitting hairs about the meaning of the ambiguous term species, which has a lot of different definitions, or applying a contemporary meaning to Brigham Young's use of it, it is telling that Brigham Young declared every species is true to its kind. And for evidence of this fact, he appealed to both the scriptures and to common experience. In other words, there are a great variety of dogs, but we do not see a dog producing offspring that are not dogs. President Brigham Young also said regarding the existence of Adam and the reality of the fall, "Facts are facts, and we might as well argue that there is not a railway across this continent to carry the people and goods as to argue that Adam was not in the Garden of Eden, that he did not fall, that sin is not in the world, or that Jesus is not the Christ." So all of those seemed like basic verities to Brigham Young, and one is as true as the other. And that ought to be the same. That with every Latter-day Saint, we ought to have equal assurance of all of those things. One of the most notable denunciations of evolution from this era came from John Taylor. While he was president of the church, President Taylor wrote his famous treatise, Mediation and Atonement. In that work, President Taylor wrote the following: "The animal and vegetable creations are governed by certain laws and are composed of certain elements peculiar to themselves. This applies to man, to the beasts, fowls, fish, and creeping things, to the insects, and to all animated nature, each one possessing its own distinctive features, each requiring a specific sustenance, each having an organism and faculties governed by prescribed laws to perpetuate its own kind. So accurate is the formation of the various living creatures that an intelligent student of nature can tell by any particular bone of the skeleton of an animal to what class or order it belongs. These principles do not change as represented by evolutionists of the Darwinian school. But the primitive organisms of all living beings exist in the same form as when they first received their impress from their maker. There are indeed some very slight exceptions, as for instance the ass may mix with the mare and produce the mule. But there it ends. The violation of the laws of procreation receives a check, and its operations can go no further. Similar compounds may possibly be made by experimentalists in the vegetable and mineral kingdoms, but the original elements remain the same. Yet this is not the normal, but an abnormal condition with them, as with animals, birds, etc. And if we take man, he is said to have been made in the image of God, for the simple reason that he is a son of God. And being his son, he is, of course, his offspring, an emanation from God, in whose likeness, we are told, he is made. He did not originate from a chaotic mass of matter, moving or inert, but came forth possessing, in an embryonic state, all the faculties and powers of a God. And when he shall be perfected and have progressed to maturity, he will be like his Father, a God, being indeed his offspring. As the horse, the ox, the sheep, and every living creature, including man, propagates its own species and perpetuates its own kind, so God does perpetuate his. We don't only have the two presidents of the church living contemporaneously with Darwin to appeal to. There were other prophets, seers, and revelators in the 19th century who also spoke out on the issue. None of them spoke out in favor of Darwin, however. But here's a strange theory that needs to be looked at, because people often use this who want to try to go down the evolution route or prove that it's a viable belief. Orson Hyde, the president of the Council of the 12, did teach a strange theory relative to humans living before Adam, but this was not in the context of evolution, as he proposed his theory in the year 1854, 5 years before Darwin's book was printed in 1859. He cannot therefore be considered a proponent of evolution, for his theory was not framed around it, nor was it a result of Darwinism. Additionally, Elder Hyde's theory was based on a mistaken premise, which we shall see to after looking at what he proposed. Please note again that we never display disrespect for any of the prophets, seers, or revelators that God has called, ever. We love Elder Orson Hyde. But that doesn't mean that we accept everything they teach if we find a discrepancy between them and the scriptures. We have to use our head and some spirituality when we see a rare instance like this come up. Joseph Fielding Smith explained, "It makes no difference what is written or what anyone has said. If what has been said is in conflict with what the Lord has revealed, we can set it aside. My words and the teaching of any other member of the church, high or low, if they do not square with the revelations, we need not accept them. Let us have this matter clear. We have accepted the 4 standard works as the measuring yardsticks or balances by which we measure every man's doctrine." He said again, "The Lord has given us the 4 standards which lie at the foundation of our faith. Each member of the church should be so well versed that he or she would be able to discern whether or not any doctrine taught conforms to the revealed word of the Lord. Moreover, the members of the church are entitled, if they are fully keeping the commandments and covenants the Lord has given us, to have the spirit of discernment. The fact remains, however, that too many of the members have not taken advantage of their blessings and obligations, and therefore they are unable to distinguish between truth and error. The lay members of the church are under obligation to accept the teachings of the authorities, unless they can discover in them some conflict with the revelations and commandments the Lord has given. And so on this basis, we are going to analyze Elder Hyde's teaching on this very interesting topic. He said, "The earth, you remember, was void and empty until our first parents began at the Garden of Eden. What does the term replenish mean? The word is derived from the Latin re and plenus. Re denotes repetition, iteration, and plenus signifies full and complete. Then the meaning of the word replenish is to refill, re-complete. If I were to go into a merchant's store and find he had got a new stock of goods, I should say, 'You have replenished your stock,' that is, filled up your establishment, for it looks as it did before. Now go forth, says the Lord, and replenish the earth, for it was covered with gloomy clouds of darkness, excluded from the light of heaven, and darkness brooded upon the face of the deep. The world was peopled before the days of Adam, as much so as it was before the days of Noah. It was said that Noah became the father of a new world, but it was the same old world still, and will continue to be, though it may pass through many changes." Then he says, when God said, "Go forth and replenish the earth," it was to replenish the inhabitants of the human species and make it as it was before. Our first parents then were commanded to multiply and replenish the earth. So that's his idea. It was that there was people before Adam, and that the word replenish means fill again. So there were people before Adam, and that's the whole argument. So the problem with this is that while Elder Hyde was correct about the origin of our English word replenish, the word from which replenish is translated in the King James Version of the Bible does not mean refill or fill again, but rather simply to fill as in the first time. The Hebrew word from which replenish is translated is male, which means to make full. Joseph Fielding Smith explained, "It is true that the original meaning of the word replenish connotes something that is being filled again and that was once filled before. Re, again, plenus, full. Why the translators of the King James Version of the Bible use the word replenish may not be clearly known, but it is not the word used in other translations and is not the correct meaning of the Hebrew word from which the translation was originally taken. It is true that the prophet Joseph Smith followed the King James Version in the use of this word, perhaps because it had obtained common usage among the English-speaking peoples. Replenish, however, is incorrectly used in the King James translation. The Hebrew verb is male, meaning fill, to fill, or make full. The word male is the same word which is translated fill in Genesis 1:22 in the King James Bible, wherein the reference is made to the fish, fowl, and beasts of the earth. So much for that theory advanced by Elder Orson Hyde. It was based on a mistaken idea and is refuted. Orson Pratt, the great scriptorian of the 19th century and one of the original 12, and himself an accomplished scientist and mathematician, denied evolution by the authority of Scripture as well. He remarked, "After having made every necessary preparation, countless species of living, moving beings came from the spirit world to inhabit earthly bodies and take up their abode upon this magnificent creation. Among the rest, man, the offspring of deity, left his ancient home, his brother and sister spirits, and came to a world most beautifully adapted to his future wants. Here he entered a tabernacle of flesh and bones and received dominion and authority over all the lower orders of existence. Here immortality reigned, and death had no dominion. The elements were so wisely arranged and proportioned that life was derived from all things ordained for the use of man or beast, fowl or fish. The nourishing element of life was diffused through the earth, and the ocean and the air. Life pervaded every vegetable and fruit not forbidden to man. Life reigned triumphantly throughout the vast creation. Death was unknown. It had not been seen, heard of, nor experienced in all the varied ranks of earthly beings. Here then was a creation, very good, inhabited by beings capable of eternal existence, both body and spirit. Here was a creation adapted to the wants of all its inhabitants, calculated to preserve unchanged that immortality with which they were endowed. Here then was a creation worth possessing as an eternal abode. So essentially, when God created the earth, he created it very good, and he said so. If the case was such that, well, outside the Garden of Eden, there was things living and dying, and there was death and destruction and struggle and everything that would be necessary for the evolution story, if that's the case, that would not be a very good creation, and it's particularly in the eyes of a perfect God. So he created it this way, and man made it corrupt through his own actions and choices. And that's the story we get from the scriptures, and that's exactly what we get here from Orson Pratt. He said, "We have general characteristics of the human form, and we do not look like the original of man according to Darwin's idea. We do not look like the monkey or baboon from which Darwin says man originated. Men the world over have many features bearing a general resemblance, and their form is molded in the image of the Most High." And of course, why not? Because we are descended from God. He is our Father, both spiritually and lineally, and the prophets taught that. He said, "By revelations given in ancient days and renewed through the young prophet of God," that's Joseph Smith, "we learn that we ourselves did not begin to exist when we were born into this state of existence. We learn that we are of higher origin than that assigned by poor, unbelieving man. Contrast the ideas of the last few centuries with the ideas that God has revealed from heaven. They would make man look for his origin down to the very reptile and the worm that crawls upon the earth, and to the fish of the sea, as the first father, the first origin, the first oyster. Such is the reasoning of the learned of the last few centuries, the evolution theory. In other words, that which you learn from books, the creation of man's folly and foolishness. But when we learn through the revelations of God that instead of man's coming up from the poor worm of the dirt, he descended from that being who controls the universe by his power, that he descended from that being who is the fullness of all knowledge and who sways his scepter over more planetary systems than there are sands upon the seashore. When we are his offspring, we are his sons and his daughters. We are his children. He has begotten us, and we existed before the foundation of the world." So a clear refutation of Darwinism from Orson Pratt on several levels. He said again, "Now we have been in the habit of thinking that the various kinds of animals that have lived, according to geologists, were the first flesh on the earth, and we go away back millions of ages to see that these lower formations of life existed before man. But the Lord gives us different information from this. He shows us that among all the animated creatures of flesh, man was the first and that was ever placed upon the earth in this temporal condition, contradicting the theories of geologists. That is, so far as placing man on the earth in this present probation is concerned. What may have been taken place millions of ages before the world was organized temporally for man to inhabit is not revealed. But so far as this present change is concerned, that took place about 6,000 years ago, man was the first being that came upon the earth and inhabited a body of flesh and bones." And so what he's saying is that Adam and Eve were the first creatures on God's creation that became mortal, because they were the initiators of the fall. right? So they were the first ones to be subject to their bodies becoming mortal so that they would die. Not animals living outside the Garden of Eden, not creatures that God had created and prepared for the earth. They were not the first ones to feel the effects of the fall. It was Adam and Eve themselves. Erastus Snow, called to be an apostle in 1849, was astute enough to see the fundamental flaws of evolution theory. First of all, he had a perceptive enough mind to be able to discern between facts and interpretations of facts, something that evolutionists have a very hard time doing, and that they kind of expect you to not be able to do so that you will believe their theory. But let's hear what Elder Snow has to say. Says, we have a variety of solid rocks and ask, how are they formed? Geologists undertake to tell us, and they refer us to the book of nature. But they are like other school children. They make a great many mistakes in reading. What they read correctly is correct. What they read incorrectly is incorrect. And it is folly for geologists or any other class of scientists to assume that they know it all, or that they have read the book of nature from beginning to end and comprehend it through and through. So that's actually a very valuable thought on this issue, because what the geologists and evolutionists want to say, not all geologists, but the Darwinist geologists want us to believe, is that, you know, fossils in the earth and such are millions of years old. Well, it's a fact that the fossils are there. We can look at them, we can, you know, weigh them, we can observe certain qualities and things, and those are all facts. But to believe that they were millions of years old, or that they evolved from such and such creature at some point in time, or that they eventually evolved into something else down the line, those are interpretations of the facts. That's a story built on top of the facts and are not in and of themselves facts. And so that's an important consideration. And Elder Snow pointed out the difference between those kinds of ideas. Elder Snow was also perceptive enough to understand that evolution's tale of single cell to man is beyond the power of observation and is therefore not demonstrable. Instead, it must be taken on belief as a matter of faith, so to speak. So Elder Snow taught, Mr. Darwin and a kindred school of modern philosophers would fain try to impress upon us their theory of evolutions, and would have us believe we are descendants from and only a little in advance of our ancestor the monkey, and that other inferior grades of animals are aspiring to become monkeys. They fail to demonstrate their theories simply because they are not demonstratable. And of course, that's the case. You cannot demonstrate macroevolution. It requires obscene, ridiculous amounts of time. So they're always going to say that, oh, yeah, no, you can't actually observe it. It's just all you can see is the microevolution, and that's all you're ever going to see. Well, then we never really can test and show that it actually does that microevolution actually becomes macroevolution. It's not something that you can actually demonstrate through any kind of observation or study or empirical means, not through observable experimentation. So that is what his point is, and of course that's the case, but evolutionists can't see that. They see everything through their Darwin glasses, and so they interpret everything that they see based on the story of evolution. And so they believe as just as sure as anything that, yeah, of course that macroevolution happens. You just give it enough time. But unfortunately, it really is just a belief. Elder Snow also contrasted the theory of evolution with the story of creation as though they were opposites. He said, there is a theory put forth by Mr. Darwin and others that is the school of modern philosophers, which is termed in late years the theory of evolution, that man in our present state upon the earth is but the sequence and outgrowth of steady advancement from the lowest orders of creation till the present type of man, and that we have advanced step by step from the lowest order of creation till at last man has been formed upon the earth in our present sphere of action. In short, that our great-grandfathers were apes and monkeys. And how much satisfaction these philosophers have in their contemplation of their grandfather monkeys, we are left to conjecture. But such are the theories put forth by some of our modern philosophers. But we find nothing on the earth, or in the earth, or under the earth that indicates that any of these monkeys or apes, or any other orders of creation below man, have ever accomplished any great exploits. So there certainly is a very great difference between man and the animals. And I know that evolutionists are constantly trying to blur the lines and make man into just another beast. But any child can see that there's a vast difference between people and any animal in the world. Elder Snow continues, so far as the history of this earth is known, whether written or unwritten, or whether written in volumes of books, whether engraven upon metallic plates, or whether found impressed in rocks, neither geologists nor any other scientists have ever been able to show us any great exploits of any of these inferior grades of being to indicate that there was any such vitality in them as to develop in their future progress the present order of beings we call man. But if there is any truth in the history given us by Moses, so here he's going into the creation account, this being we call man is only God in embryo. And Moses tells us that the Creator conversed with this man whom he called Adam, consisting of male and female. He conversed with them, showed himself to them, and spoke with them at different times, gave them instructions, gave them his law, visited them repeatedly in their new home, and in the place we call the Garden of Eden, and the garden that the Lord planted for man, eastward in Eden. After he was driven out from the face of his Creator from the garden, and the veil was drawn between him and his Creator, yet from time to time God was wont to draw aside that veil and show himself, and we not only find that Adam and Eve had frequent intercourse with their Creator and talked with him personally as we talk with our children and they with us, but we find many of Adam's descendants obtained like privileges of seeing their Creator and speaking with him, receiving instructions from him. What a vast difference between stories of human beginnings, from slime up through the animals, or God speaking to man, special creation, children of God. It's a vast difference. You can't harmonize them. 20 years before he was called as an apostle, Elder Penrose was on record in the Journal of Discourses for his opposition to evolution. He said, "Now, if we are the children of God, and if Jesus Christ is the Son of God, we can, upon that reasoning, understand something about what God is like. For there is an eternal principle in heaven and on earth, that every seed begets of its kind. Every seed brings forth in its own likeness and character." And this is a common teaching among the prophets, that, everything brings forth of its kind, so does God. So the seed of an apple, when it is reproduced, brings forth an apple, and so with a pear, and so with a plum, and so with all the varieties of the vegetable kingdom. It is the same with all the varieties of the animal kingdom. The doctrine of evolution, as it is called, is true in some respects. That is, that species can be improved, exalted, made better, but it remains of the same species. The advancement is in the same line. It is unfoldment. We do not find any radical change from one species to another. It is an eternal principle that every seed produces its own kind, not another kind. And as we are the children of God, we can follow out the idea and perceive what God our Father is, the being who is the progenitor of our spiritual existence, the being from whom we have sprung. Note here the acknowledgement of microevolution, which is variations within a kind, right? So he said the doctrine of evolution is true in some respects, right? We can make species better or improve, but also there's a complete repudiation of macroevolution. He says we do not find any radical change from one species to another. Without quibbling over the definition of species, we can see Elder Penrose's point very clearly. Macroevolution is false, both according to the scriptures and according to common experience. Things bring forth after their kind. That's just how it works. Elder Penrose was eventually ordained an apostle in 1904 and was called into the first presidency in 1911. So clearly, this type of teaching did not bar him from those kinds of privileges. Elder Moses Thatcher, while speaking words of encouragement to the youth of the church, took occasion to warn them of the false philosophy of evolution theory. He said, "I would have you read the records of the rocks as written by the pen of geology, the language of the leaves and the coal beds. I would have you stand on the mountain tops and view the magnificent creations of God everywhere. I would have you know how the jewels are created, for which men sacrifice their honor. I would have you penetrate the earth to its supposed molten, seething interior. I would have you study astronomy and read the music of the stars. I would have you visit the great pyramids of Mexico and Egypt, around which is deposited the dust of ages. I would have you view all the great architectural designs that man has made by the inspiration of his Maker, and prove to you that man did not originate from the lower animals, and that the Creator is greater than that which is created." On another occasion, Elder Thatcher told the youth, "Well, some of them, that is young people, will learn that certain bright so-called philosophers have failed to find the missing link between the ape creation and God's highest handiwork, man, whom he created after his own image. But the link must be found, so they devote health and wealth looking for what never existed, but never comprehend that wise saying, 'Man, know thyself.'" George Q. Cannon, the astute leader, was also critical of evolution. He said, "We are a very imperfect people. We have much to learn. But as I said, God has revealed some things to us, and we know that they are true. We can bring all the science of the world to the standard which God has given unto us. As I have told many of our young men when they have been going to college, how valuable it is to know that these doctrines of Darwin are incorrect, and that man has not come up from that low condition through thousands or millions of years to his present stature and reasoning faculties, etc. It is worth something to know that, to begin with, and not spend time over it." And I would wholeheartedly agree with that, President Cannon. It is absolutely worth something for a college-age student to know that. Unfortunately, when he goes off to college, he's being heavily indoctrinated. At another time, he said, "It cannot be a question with any person of faith in our church as to the origin of man. We did not have monkeys for ancestors, nor any inferior order of beings. We have not grown up to our present position as human beings through various stages of development from a very low order of creation. We descended from God. Man was created in His image. He is our Father. We have not descended to reach our present position, but many of the human family have fallen from their high estate into dreadful degradation." And so here he says it should be no question to anyone who believes the gospel as to what the origin of man is. Absolutely. Unfortunately, there is a class of members of the church, LDS evolutionists, liberal Mormons, who beg to differ with the prophets. But that's not our true origin. Our true origin is from God. He also said, "We hear considerable about evolution. Who is there that believes more in true evolution than the Latter-day Saint? The evolution of a man until he shall become a god, until he shall sit at the right hand of the Father, until he shall be a joint heir with Jesus. That is the gospel of Jesus Christ, believed in by the Latter-day Saints. That is the kind of evolution we believe in, but not that evolution from some low type of animal life." And now here we are at the first half of the 20th century, and this part is a big one because it was very, very impactful. The first half of the 20th century was the most doctrinally significant with regards to the topic of evolution. From it, we have 3 First Presidency denouncements of evolution, the church responding to national controversies respecting evolution, a controversy on BYU campus regarding teaching evolution, a divisive controversy between church leaders on the matter of pre-Adamites, input from 2 notable scientist apostles, and continued messages against evolution from various other apostles. So first we will discuss an early mention of evolution in the 20th century. Elder John W. Taylor, the son of President John Taylor and an apostle himself, likewise spoke out against evolution in the October General Conference of 1903. In discussing false doctrines that have crept into the church among a limited number, he said, "We have still a great work to perform, and we should not waste our time on hypnotism or Christian Science or evolution and such things. We have believers in evolution in our midst, and there is a little blight upon the top of the trees in this regard." In other words, it's a stain upon the church, or an ugly spot. He says, "As a servant of God, I will tell you, mankind cannot be redeemed. Worlds without end cannot evolve or crystallize or get into the condition entitling them to become heirs of God and joint heirs with Jesus Christ and to partake of the fullness of his glory, cannot go on to perfection and sit down in the councils of heaven with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and those bright intelligences who created this world and others, only through the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. All the evolution in the world will not save a single soul. Neither will all the Christian Science, neither will spiritualism, nor hypnotism, nor any other ism that is not of God." And of course, evolutionism is not of God. Since the publication of Darwin's Origin of Species, church officers had been consistently denouncing the theory of evolution both on theological and scientific grounds. But it was in the early part of the 20th century that the church formally coalesced an official stance on these matters. This official stance takes the form of 3 statements of the First Presidency. The first one is the 1909 Origin of Man statement, and that is the most famous one. And then there's the 1910 Words in a Season, like a Christmas time message from the same First Presidency. And then there's the 1925 Mormon View of Evolution from another First Presidency, a whole different First Presidency. So the first and most notable First Presidency declaration on evolution was given during the presidency of Joseph F. Smith. The year 1909 renewed discussion and excitement about Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, being 50 years since the publication of Origin of Species. There were even liberal faculty on BYU campus advocating Darwinism at this time. In response, the First Presidency felt it prudent to formulate a statement representing the attitude of the church towards evolution theory. The Origin of Man document was drafted at the request of the First Presidency, who selected Orson F. Whitney for the task, an apostle and gifted writer. Afterward, it was reviewed by a committee of apostles, which also included not yet apostle James E. Talmage, who acted on the committee as a consultant on scientific matters. He was not an apostle until 1911. It is a fairly long dissertation and lays some doctrinal foundation, such as pre-existence and divine revelation, prior to unleashing its most forceful paragraphs. The paragraphs of greatest interest will be quoted here. It says, "In presenting this statement on evolution that follows, we are not conscious of putting forth anything essentially new. Neither is it our desire to do so. Truth is what we wish to present. The truth, eternal truth, is fundamentally old. A restatement of the original attitude of the church relative to this matter is all that will be attempted here." So in other words, they're not going out on a limb and creating new doctrine. They're just telling us what the gospel has been saying all along. He goes on to tell the truth as God has revealed it and commend it to the acceptance of those who need to conform their opinions thereto is the sole purpose of this presentation. So in other words, you must, if you're a believer, conform your opinions to this document. It says, it is held by some that Adam was not the first man upon this earth, and that the original human being was a development from lower orders of the animal creation. These, however, are the theories of men, in contrast to the word of the Lord. And he says, the word of the Lord declared that Adam was the first man of all men, and we are therefore in duty bound to regard him as the primal parent of our race. It was shown to the brother of Jared that all men were created in the beginning after the image of God. Whether we take this to mean the spirit or the body or both, it commits us to the same conclusion. Man began life as a human being in the likeness of our heavenly Father. True it is that the body of man enters upon its career as a tiny germ embryo, which becomes an infant, quickened at a certain stage by the Spirit whose tabernacle it is, and the child, after being born, develops into a man. There is nothing in this, however, to indicate that the original man, the first of our race, began life as anything less than a man, or less than the human germ or embryo that becomes a man. Man, by searching, cannot find out God. Never unaided will he discover the truth about the beginning of life. Well, that's interesting because evolutionists are trying to find out about the beginning of life unaided from God. They don't want input from religion, and that's exactly the route they're trying to look, is a non-religious view. And we have here from the First Presidency that they will never be able to succeed in that route, trying to find out the beginning of the origin of man. He says the Lord must reveal himself or remain unrevealed, and the same is true of the facts relating to the origin of Adam's race. God alone can reveal them. Some of these facts, however, are already known. That is, they're in the Scriptures. And what has been made known, it is our duty to receive and retain. So here we have the truth. We have them in the Scriptures, and it's our duty to keep them, to hold on to them. He says the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, basing its belief on divine revelation, ancient and modern, proclaims man to be the direct and lineal offspring of deity. Now, if man is the direct and lineal offspring of deity, he cannot be the direct and lineal offspring of animals. This origin of man statement is still considered to be the Church's quintessential statement on the matter of evolution, both by the faithful and the unimpressed. This is simply because it is hard to deny such a forthright statement from the First Presidency. In fact, in February of 2002, the Church declared that it expresses the Church's doctrinal position on these matters of questions concerning the creation and evolution theory. Evolutionists in the Church go to great lengths to make it appear that this impressive document does not really say what it very obviously brings across to the reader, and often they choose to interpret it in very strange and convoluted ways to try and get out of having to believe it. But we must keep in mind that the First Presidency issued this declaration to the generality of the Church, and therefore would have chosen to put it into words which would have been readily understandable by the average person. It is a very strained interpretation indeed to suggest that some secret code or line of thinking is required to interpret it properly, or that it can be sidestepped through such means. So, oh yeah, well, when he says theories of men, that's actually, they like the theories of men. No, that's not. The document is very clearly contrasting the word of the Lord with these false theories. It's obvious when you look at the document. It's just that evolutionists in the Church don't like it. Of course, evolutionists in the Church, in order to preserve their precious theory, which they love better, have done just those very things. They sidestep it, they snake around it, they radically reinterpret it in a way that no normal person would do. The First Presidency's statement, the origin of man, was poorly received by evolutionists in the church. They didn't like it, which is no doubt the reason why the First Presidency and subsequent First Presidencies have not pursued the issue further. They haven't pushed it further than they have with the 1909 statement by official declaration, except to reinforce the validity of this 1909 origin of man document and its doctrines. Amazingly, there are those who will not accept the will of the Lord. Those are the liberal Mormons, even from the highest authority in the church and in an official capacity. So when they're speaking the word of the Lord to us in an official statement, declaration, they will not listen. So, wow, no, they just won't. So those are the types of people that are pushing for belief in evolution as a valid belief within the church. But as we continue to investigate, we're going to see and demonstrate that that is not the case. Rather than fracture the unity of the church because of reluctance of some to accept the official doctrinal declaration of God's prophets, the church seems instead content to teach the truth of the scriptures and not dwell long on the issue of evolution. To make absolute adherence to the truth about origins a required article of faith would cause a great schism of the less faithful who think they are learned, forcing them into a corner, so to speak, and putting them in circumstances in which they must choose. For many would choose their theory instead. So a lot of these LDS evolutionists, they take a lot of satisfaction in the fact that, hey, I'm allowed to believe evolution. I can go to the temple, I can baptize my children, I can pass the sacrament, or any of that stuff. And yeah, you can, but that doesn't make your belief right. That's not saying that, well, your belief must really be in line with the scriptures or our religion. No, it's not. Imagine what would happen if the church did come out and say, well, no, you can't go to the temple anymore because you believe in evolution, or you can't baptize your children because you're an evolutionist. You can just imagine the absolute freakout that would occur from that. Like, just people would lose their minds. And so, of course, it would be unwise to do that. So, people that are that reject the prophets enough that they choose Darwinism instead, or they reject the scriptures enough that they choose Darwinism instead, do you really want to, as a church, push them right into a corner on it? Probably not. So you want to give them some allowance to be able to believe their heresies, and maybe they'll be able to find their way into Abraham's bosom in the next life, if they don't follow their theory all the way into the abyss. So whereas a measure of allowance on the matter without disciplining those who hold the heretical view of Darwinism, it may allow for many of these misguided souls to nevertheless find salvation. As for himself, in June of 1909, President Smith taught extremely anti-evolutionary doctrine at the funeral of Rachel Grant. That's Heber J. Grant's mother. He said, "We did not spring from spawn. Our spirits existed from the beginning, have always existed, and will continue forever. We did not pass through the ordeals of embodiment in the lesser animals in order to reach the perfection to which we have obtained in manhood and womanhood, in the image and likeness of God. God was and is our Father, and his children were begotten in the flesh of his own image and likeness, male and female. There may have been times when they did not possess the same intelligence that they possessed at other times. There are periods in the history of the world when men have dwindled into ignorance and barbarism, and then there were other times when they have grown in intelligence, developed in understanding, enlarged in spirit and comprehension, approaching nearer to the condition and likeness of their Father and God, and then losing faith, losing the love of God, losing the light of the Spirit, and returning again to semi-barbarism. Then again, they have been restored by the power and operation of the Spirit of the Lord upon their minds until they've reached a degree of intelligence. And so here is an explanation, and this has been taught very thoroughly by leaders of the church, apostles, about an explanation for the existence of so-called cavemen. Right? It's people that have degenerated since the time of Adam. They departed from the gospel and lost a lot of knowledge and basically degenerated into barbarism. And this has been taught thoroughly by apostles. There is a statement attributed to Joseph F. Smith in an editorial of the 1910 Improvement Era, which is the forerunner to the Ensign magazine, of which Joseph F. Smith was an editor. Now, here is a statement that evolutionists really latch onto to show that they think that Joseph F. Smith was undecided on the matter of evolution. So we're going to definitely analyze this and see if that's actually the case. So the statement briefly recounts some creation scriptures and then reads, "These are the authentic statements of the scriptures, ancient and modern, and it is best to rest with these until the Lord shall see fit to give more light on the subject. Whether the mortal bodies of man evolved in natural processes to present perfection through the direction and power of God, whether the first parents of our generations, Adam and Eve, were transplanted from another sphere with immortal tabernacles, which became corrupted through sin and the parking of natural foods, in the process of time, whether they were born here in mortality as other mortals have been, are questions not fully answered in the revealed Word of God." So it is apparent that there are a few issues with this anomalous statement. It is evidently not authored by President Joseph F. Smith. Even though he was listed as an editor of the column, the editorial was unsigned, and Joseph F. Smith was not the only editor of the magazine. It contradicts what President Joseph F. Smith taught on the subject of evolution and the origin of man. It ignores what the scriptures have taught, which make strong implications to the contrary, and even this statement proclaims that it is best to rest with these, the scriptures, because they are authentic statements. So even this isn't particularly pro-evolution. Nevertheless, there are many who place their hopes on this statement and look to it as an official concession to evolution by Joseph F. Smith. For President Smith's views, people should consult the other works already cited. And they should also take note that in 1913, President Smith taught man was born of woman. Christ, the Savior, was born of woman, and God and the Father was born of woman. Adam, our earthly parent, was also born of woman into this world, and same as Jesus and you and I. So he says Adam was born of woman, but that other statement from the Improvement Era was saying that, oh yeah, we don't know. The scriptures aren't plain enough, but here he's bearing his testimony that he knows that Adam was born of woman. So that's that doesn't correlate with what that Improvement Era statement said. So we have teachings of President Smith before and teachings of President Smith after that 1910 editorial in the Improvement Era that do not match it. If Adam was born of a woman, then who were his parents? The scriptures confirm that Adam was born into the world naturally, but also proclaims that Adam was the Son of God. Yes, he was the Son of God. Now, and President Smith himself, in the official Origin of Man statement, declared, "The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, basing its belief on divine revelation, ancient and modern, proclaims man to be the direct and lineal offspring of deity." Yes, Adam was born from celestial parents, and so was Eve, and that is the origin of man. That is your lineage as a human being. It's a powerful thought. So let's analyze this purported editorial of Joseph F. Smith's, this 1910 Improvement Era editorial, with known verified teachings of Joseph F. Smith, and see if it lines up or not, and see if there's any incongruencies. So this article said whether the mortal bodies of man evolved in natural processes to present perfection is not fully answered in the Word of God. Well, what did Joseph F. Smith say about that? Well, that we did not pass through the ordeals of embodiment in the lesser animals in order to reach the perfection of manhood. So that's saying we don't know about, natural processes evolving to perfection. And here on the right hand side he says we did not, and then he uses the same word, to perfection. So these statements are opposite to each other. One says it doesn't know, and the other is very certain about it. Here we have it saying that it is not fully answered in the revealed word of the Lord, but here we have Joseph F. Smith appealing to the word of the Lord about Adam as the first man of all men, and that how that makes us duty bound to regard him as a primal parent of our race. So not fully answered in the word of God on the left hand side, and on the right hand side he's appealing directly to Scripture to make that point. And again, whether the mortal bodies of man evolved is not fully answered. But then here in the Origin of Man statement, he says some of these facts are already known. So we know. And then it says the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints proclaims man to be the direct and lineal offspring of deity. So this is something that we know from the Scriptures and from Revelation. It's not that it's not fully answered, like it says on the left-hand side. These teachings don't match the editorial. So that which is demonstrated we accept with joy. A very important statement, and one that I've seen evolutionists twist to their own advantage, but it wasn't meant for what they think it was. Not long after the Origin of Man statement, the same First Presidency again commented on the whole matter with the following statement, which constitutes the second First Presidency statement on evolution. In a Christmas message in 1910, the First Presidency made a statement that, while not specifically referencing evolution, had obvious implications for the theory. The First Presidency stated, "Our religion is not hostile to real science. That which is demonstrated we accept with joy. But vain philosophy, human theory, and mere speculations of men we do not accept, nor do we adopt anything contrary to divine revelation or to good common sense. But everything that tends to right conduct, that harmonizes with sound morality and increases faith in deity, finds favor with us no matter where it may be found." Now, this is really screaming against evolution, and you have to be willingly ignorant to not see it. So they say that which is demonstrated we accept with joy, and evolutionists say, "Oh yeah, macroevolution is demonstrated, so there, we accept that with joy." But it has not been demonstrated, and the prophets have taught that. And of course, macroevolution is not demonstratable, as Elder Snow taught, Elder Erastus Snow. And then they talk about human theory and speculations. Well, that's just like the wording that they used in the 1909 statement about these, however, are the theories of men, talking about how Adam was, came from lower orders of life. So here they're saying we don't accept human theories of men. We don't accept those things. So when you put this side by side with the 1909 statement, it makes a very strong statement against evolution. Many charge those who disbelieve in evolution with being against science. The underlying premise of this charge is that evolution equals science. And so I'm sure people are going to say that about me. "Oh yeah, this guy's presentation, he doesn't accept science," or something like that. Well, no, I love science. I think science is really cool. It's great. It's awesome and useful, but I don't buy evolution. It's a bad idea. So, and it's unscriptural. So you can believe and appreciate science and not accept evolution. They're not the same thing. Evolution is a theory within science that is a bad idea. But this statement of the First Presidency is not to be interpreted with the thought that science is synonymous to evolution, but rather the qualifier real science strongly suggests that there are elements of science that are not true. How could there be real science if there wasn't fake science or incorrect science, right? This would include the evolutionary theory of common descent, that is part of those that are not true, part of the science category of science that's not true, which is vain philosophy and human theory and mere speculations of men, and is contrary to divine revelation and to good common sense. It can be readily obtained from the foregoing statement that since evolution from a single-celled organism to a human being is not observable, it does not classify as that which is demonstrated. Interestingly, the First Presidency apparently did not regard evolution as real science. No doubt this is because the worldview which evolution offers is not demonstratable and requires belief to subscribe to. Secondly, the First Presidency proclaims that our religion accepts demonstrated truths of science, such as microevolution. Now, they didn't use the word, but that's really what they mean. So that's variation within the different kinds of animals. We see it. We see it regularly in our natural world. We accept it. But macroevolution, the idea that all life evolved from a single-celled organism, is not and cannot be demonstrated, and so we need not accept it. And since it is contrary to the scriptures and the observations in nature, we cannot accept it in good conscience. That's really exactly what this 1910 statement from the First Presidency is saying. It was around this time in 1911 that 3 BYU professors were fired from their positions for advocating evolution theory to their students and creating a faction within the school that did not faithfully accept the scriptures but sought to spiritualize away their meaning. A committee of apostles, including Francis M. Lyman, Heber J. Grant, Hiram M. Smith, Charles W. Penrose, George F. Richards, and for a time Anthony W. Ivins, investigated the matter. Elder Ivins was reported to have quit the committee, but being unwilling to judge the case, but we shall see more of his views on evolution later. If you're thinking that he's in support of evolution, you're mistaken. Heber J. Grant summarized the findings of the committee. We were of the unanimous opinion that it would be unsafe for them to continue teaching at the Brigham Young University. And when he's talking about unsafe, they're talking about spiritually and intellectually unsafe for the students to hear that kind of theory preached to them at a church school. So we can accept that all of these 5 apostles were opposed to evolution based on their unanimous opinion about this case. It was around the time of the controversy surrounding the dismissal of these faculty members that President Joseph F. Smith wrote in an editorial to the Improvement Era and the Juvenile Instructor some reasons why he thought that speculations about evolution theory were best left out of church schools, and declared evolution to be a theory which we believe is more or less a fallacy. So again, that's from the Juvenile Instructor and Improvement Era, and that's another thing that shows inconsistency with that 1910 Improvement Era article that some purport was written by Joseph F. Smith, but which doesn't match his teachings. During General Conference of the Church in 1918, Elder Rutger Clausen was discoursing on the first chapter of the Bible and noted its implications for evolution. He said, "Now it seems to me that there is to be very great lesson learned here from this important chapter in the Bible, Genesis 1. In the first place, I think that it answers perfectly the false doctrine of evolution. We are distinctly given to understand that every living creature was made after its kind. We are not to expect that a lion will grow into a horse, or that a cow will grow into an elephant, but we have reason to believe that a horse will always be a horse. You may be able to improve the horse, but it will still be a horse, and so with the other animals of God's creation." Note here Elder Clausen's acknowledgement of microevolution. So you may be able to improve the horse, but it will still be a horse. is denial of macroevolution proposed by Darwin. So we don't expect a horse or a lion or anything to develop into something that isn't a horse or a lion. This is the reasonable view that all believers in the scriptures hold. We can observe variation among the kinds of animals. That's microevolution. But the idea that animals evolve into completely different kinds is not scriptural and not observed in nature either. The third statement against evolution by the First Presidency was given in September 1925 and was called the Mormon view of evolution. This time, the First Presidency comprised of Heber J. Grant, Anthony W. Ivins, and Charles W. Nibley. Two of the three had previously sat on the council that ultimately recommended dismissing the evolutionist professors from BYU in 1911, and that would be Heber J. Grant and Anthony W. Ivins. Now, Anthony W. Ivins, first counselor in the First Presidency, dropped off of that council and was unwilling to judge the matter for whatever reason. But we do have his views on evolution now in 1925. By its very title, the Mormon view of evolution, it indicates that the latter-day doctrine of evolution varies from that of Darwinism, right? Because otherwise, if we just shared Darwinism's view of evolution, then why would there be a Mormon view of evolution? It also carries the suggestion of authority and orthodoxy. In other words, this is how we ought to consider evolution as Latter-day Saints from the First Presidency. So that's really basically what it is too. That's what this document, this statement is. It's telling us, okay, well, here's how we accept evolution in this respect. And so how do we accept evolution according to the First Presidency? Let's take a look. Functionally, the 1925 statement is a condensed version of the 1909 statement, but with some of the strongest statements present in the 1909 document omitted. It was not as emphatic and was rather more guarded than the 1909 statement. It was also shorter, but it did reinforce many of its points and reused much of its phraseology. In fact, it reads almost exactly the same. It's just shorter. Like the 1909 statement, the Mormon view of evolution also reinforces that Adam was the first man and a living soul, which means he was a real person, and that mankind is descended from God, and the obvious corollary here being that he is not descended from animals. Mankind is not. The basic premise of the document, also evidenced by its title, is that the only way Mormons correctly accept evolution is by the process of our evolving from an elemental intelligence to a spirit, to a mortal, to a disembodied spirit, to a resurrected being, and an exalted God, according to the plan of salvation. So that's our view of evolution. We don't see some weird detour into becoming animals in that process, because we're essentially the same being, children of God, through the whole experience. The important question is, how did the prophets and apostles themselves interpret the Mormon view of evolution at the time it was given? So this is very interesting. What did they say around the time that this statement was made? So instead of trying to go back and place our own Darwinistic interpretation onto this statement from the First Presidency, what did the prophets who were in council with the First Presidency at the time, what did they say about it? To understand the church's third First Presidency statement prompted by evolution, called the Mormon view of evolution, you have to understand the circumstances surrounding the 1925 Scopes monkey trial and the role of William Jennings Bryan. At the time, there was a national controversy over the teaching of evolution in schools that centered around a case in Tennessee where a teacher named John T. Scopes was teaching evolution in public school against Tennessee law. As a prominent creationist and politician and former presidential candidate, William Jennings Bryan was called as a witness for the case. It became a bitter contest, this case did, between biblical accuracy and anti-religion. It really was very nasty, ugly on the side of the anti-religionists. Bryan died just days after the trial ended. The trial was decided on July 21st, 1925, and he died on July 26th, 1925. So he basically gave his final testimony of the gospel or the truth as he understood it in that nationwide trial. William Jennings Bryan is also quoted heavily in Joseph Fielding Smith's landmark book Against Evolution, Man, His Origin, and Destiny. The October 1925 General Conference, which occurred shortly after the unveiling of the Mormon view of evolution, provides a mountain of insight about what the prophets and apostles considered its message to mean. There were several references throughout the conference to the trial and the true nature of man's origin. At the very beginning of conference, the opening speaker, President Heber J. Grant, discussed his opinion of William Jennings Bryan. He said, "The publishing house of Revel & Company have published a book containing the last address of William Jennings Bryan, which address was prepared for the celebrated evolution case in Tennessee, but was never delivered. I have had the privilege of reading and rereading the book. It shows that he had perfect faith in God our Heavenly Father, and in my judgment it is a very strong defense of the divinity of Christ and the godhood of our Father in heaven." I had the pleasure of visiting with Mr. Bryan after his remarks following our conference years prior, and he had said that he was expected to deliver 3 speeches in California before leaving, but that he believed the world at large would get more benefit from what he had learned in our conference than the people would have received had he remained in California and delivered those 3 speeches. He promised to send me a little pamphlet containing his ideas about God. After reading it, I remember saying to my family that William Jennings Bryan ought to be a Latter-day Saint because many of his views were in perfect harmony with our faith. So that's a very strong endorsement from the president of the church, Heber J. Grant, about this man and his stance in the Scopes Monkey trial. Next, Anthony W. Ivins, one of the first presidency who gave the Mormon view of evolution statement, spoke in the afternoon of the first day of the conference. After dwelling on the falseness of evolution theory and quoting anti-evolutionary material, he said the following: "If to be in harmony with evolution, we are to renounce a single doctrine of revealed truth which has come to us, we unhesitatingly separate ourselves from modern thought and theory and confidently await the time when revealed truth, whether it be the result of scientific research or the revealed word of the Lord, will vindicate our faith in His word, which through His mercy has come to us in this, the greatest of all dispensations of the world's history." President Ivins then concluded, "My brethren and sisters, may these fundamental truths remain fixed in your minds. Let nothing lead you away from them. Listen to the word of prophecy as it comes to you through these men who sit before you this afternoon, and I promise that you will never be led astray. No development of science will ever contradict the revealed word of the Lord, which has come to us. For the moment, theories may appear to be in conflict with His revealed word, but demonstrated truth," here we come to the word demonstrated truth will always be in harmony with it, for He is the author of all truth. Directly afterward, Apostle George Albert Smith gave his sentiment on the matter, commending President Ivins for his remarks, and then alluding to William Jennings Bryan and the Tennessee trial. Then he made excellent statements inspired by the First Presidency's document, contrasting it with the false doctrine of evolution. After reading Abraham chapter 5, verses 4 through 8 about the creation, he said, That is another testimony to me of the origin of the species. It is to me the simplest explanation of the preparation of this earth for the habitation of animal and vegetable life that has ever been prepared. It has been my privilege to read the theories and to listen to the solutions of this problem by some of the wisest men of the world. But wherein they have differed from this plain statement of facts, as revealed by our Father in heaven to his servants, who were his mouthpieces to the children of men, the arguments of my father's sons, my brethren, if you will, whom I love, every one of them has been feeble indeed to bear to mind a comprehension of the origin of man. He said, I am grateful that in the midst of the confusion of our Father's children, there has been given to the members of this great organization a sure knowledge of the origin of man, that we came from the spirit world, where our spirits were begotten by our Father in heaven, that he formed our first parents from the dust of the earth, and that their spirits were placed in their bodies, and that man came, not as some have believed, not as some have preferred to believe, from some of the lower walks of life, but our ancestors were those beings who lived in the courts of heaven. We came not from some menial order of life, but our ancestor is God our Heavenly Father. I am grateful that we are not laboring under a handicap, such as I feel that some men are, who feel that they have grown up and evolved from some unknown condition. But, on the contrary, standing as we do, facing the problems of life, believing as we do, that we were first created in the image of God, that he is the Father of our spirits, and that he created this earth for us, that we might dwell hereon under his wise counsel and direction, we may be happy to rejoice in life and to prepare ourselves to go back into his presence, to live forever, when our life here upon this earth has been terminated. George Albert Smith maintained this view throughout his life and reiterated it as president of the church. He said, we are the children of God. He is the Father of our spirits. We have not come from some lower form of life, but God is the Father of our spirits, and we belong to the royal family because he is our Father. Later in the conference, a mission president spoke, and while he is not an apostle and his words do not meet that important criteria, he did speak under their supervision to the general church body without censure, and I will quote him merely to show the tenor of this conference, following the Mormon view of evolution. He said, thousands of our young people throughout the land today are being taught the Darwinian theory, and many of them are accepting it as a fact and not as a theory, which it is. The Latter-day Saints believe in the evolution tending to progress, but not according to the theory that is being so prominently placed before the young people of our country in the schools of today. President Benyon, so this was his name, Samuel O. Benyon, was later called into the First Council of the 70 as a general authority in 1933. Orson F. Whitney, after speaking highly of William Jennings Bryan, much like President Grant did, then made the following statement during this conference. He said, I believe that when God made man in his image, he made a man, and not a monkey or any other animal out of which man has evolved. He then discoursed on the greatness of our father Adam and his role in the gospel plan, and remarked, dismiss from your minds, my hearers, if any of you entertain the notion that Adam, the Ancient of Days, the great prince and patriarch of our race, was ever a jungle-inhabiting ape, or even an unenlightened caveman. He knew more about religion than all the theologians of the world combined. He knew more about science, the sources of science, than any evolutionist has ever dreamt of knowing. How can anyone whose soul has been fed with the revelations of God, whose mind has been illumined by the spirit of the gospel, the gift of the Holy Ghost, conceive of Adam, the first of the human race, as anything less than the Bible represents him to be, a man formed in the image of his Maker? This is tantamount to saying that the Maker is in the form of man. Finally, the notable J. Golden Kimball remarked on the issue. Again, he was not an apostle, but I quote him merely to give a sense of the tenor of the meeting so soon after the unveiling of the Mormon view of evolution. He said, "I have never been more greatly impressed than by Colonel Bryan, a man of the world who died fighting for God and testifying as far as his knowledge went. What more can any man do? That is the way I feel. I shall stay in this work. I uphold it." So now we're coming to another episode in church history that isn't exactly about evolution, but it kind of works into it a little bit because there's a theme that's closely related to evolution, and it's a controversy between Joseph Fielding Smith and B.H. Roberts. So the next statement from the First Presidency in 1931 is often held up by those who believe evolution as a statement from the First Presidency on the matter of evolution, but it really isn't. In fact, sometimes evolution advocates ignore completely the previous 3 official declarations from the First Presidency, which came about specifically because of evolution, and attempt to make this later 1931 address or statement, which wasn't even a public one really, appear like the landmark statement. But this is very disingenuous. The 1931 statement was made internally to church officers and was not meant for the general membership. For one thing, it revolves around the controversy that erupted between Apostle Joseph Fielding Smith and President of the 70 B.H. Roberts. 2 intellectual giants with opposing views, not on evolution per se, but on the matter of pre-Adamites specifically. It was not really a controversy of creation versus evolution. B.H. Roberts did not believe in evolution. He emphatically rejected it. The controversy surrounded a few objectionable items in the manuscript for B.H. Roberts' magnum opus called The Truth, the Way, the Life, which was proposed as a study manual for the church. Unfortunately, the manuscript contained troubling ideas about pre-Adamites and therefore ran into trouble with the book's screening committee, which included Joseph Fielding Smith, an apostle for more than 20 years. The reading committee consisted of, in order of seniority, George Albert Smith, David O. McKay, Joseph Fielding Smith, Stephen L. Richards, and Melvin J. Ballard. While he was not alone in his concerns, it was Elder Joseph Fielding Smith who spearheaded opposition to Elder Roberts' manuscript. For instance, Elder McKay wrote that Elder Roberts needed to delete some of the personal opinions which do not conform to the revelations of the Lord. The Truth, the Way, the Life was eventually published by BYU in 1994 and 1996, long after this whole controversy. And it was published more as like curiosity, a study of the event, and also to make it the manuscript public to people, but its editors observed the following. Roberts addressed 3 forms of evolutionary theory with which he was familiar from science, so he addressed them directly in his book: materialistic or mechanical evolution, agnostic evolution, and theistic or purposeful or creative evolution. He finds all 3 approaches to be inadequate and rejects all current theories as he understands them. Roberts' opinions are not those of an evolutionist. The differences of opinion between Roberts and Elder Joseph Fielding Smith on the subject of evolution were not centered on the scientific theories of origins of life forms. Rather, the central point of concern was whether death occurred on earth before the fall of Adam. B.H. Roberts wrote in his manuscript, and this has great implications for anyone who might try to claim him as an evolutionist. He said, "Let this be as it may as to the origin of life in the earth, or at least as to some forms of it. It need not affect our view here set forth as to life, and especially as to the higher forms of life. and especially of human forms of life, which beyond doubt were transplanted from some of the older and more highly developed worlds. And from a few other transported forms of life to the earth, there could be development of varied kinds of life, yet adhering closely to the great law of creation, so constantly repeated, each after his kind, not necessarily rigidly limited to stereotyped individual forms, but developing the kinds from the subdivisions of vegetable and animal kingdoms into various species through development from primeval forms, and for man a divine origin after his kind, bearing the image of God, his Father. B.H. Roberts clearly articulated here his acceptance of microevolution and rejection of macroevolution. It's all right there in the paragraph and very easy to understand when he's talking about varied kinds of life, yet adhering closely to the law of creation, each after its kind. He talks about not being rigidly limited to stereotyped individual forms, but developing somewhat from primeval forms after its kind. That's exactly the idea of microevolution, but absolutely rejects macroevolution. Unfortunately, Elder Roberts included ideas in his book which were contrary to Scripture and very speculative in nature. He fell into the same fallacious opinion as Elder Orson Hyde about pre-Adamites, using the word replenish as his basis. A rare instance of appeal to the Scriptures in these sections of his book. Unfortunately, this reference was erroneous as already shown. Elder Roberts wrote, "That is to say, previous to the advent of Adam upon the earth, some destructive cataclysm, a universal glacial period, or an excessive heat period left the earth empty and desolate, and it became the mission of Adam to replenish the earth with inhabitants. That there were pre-Adamite races in the earth, and that man's habitancy of it is of greater antiquity than the period which begins with Adam, is quite generally accepted by the scientific world, and for them admits of no doubt. But if the account of things through the Bible revelations begins with Adam, as merely the opening of a dispensation of God's providence to the human race on the earth, since that time, then matters take on a form much more understandable and makes possible the solving of many problems." So he thought this was some kind of solution to all of what the scientists were claiming about the age of the earth and the fossil record. So he wanted very much to try to reconcile these things, but in doing that, he was very much departing from the scriptural narrative. B.H. Roberts also wrote in chapter 31 of his manuscript, "This would admit of a very long period of time beyond the advent of Adam to the absolute beginning of the physical existences of the earth, during which time pre-Adamite races, less developed than he, may have existed. They may have lived and died through various long ages through which the earth passed, of which we have no information supplied by revelation concerning them, but who have provided all the fossil and other evidences of man's existence in the earth discovered by the researches of science, and which so disturb the Bible account of things when an attempt is made to stretch the Bible account to cover all the possible human life events that have happened in all the periods of time since the physical or temporal existence of the earth began." So here he's becoming very speculative because he frankly admits that there is no hint of this in the Revelations. So he's saying that, we can't find any information about them in the Revelations, but it must be the case because, scientists are saying such and such, and that's really his entire argument. Elder George Albert Smith advised Rudger Clawson, who was then president of the 12, "This entire chapter, chapter 31, is out of harmony with the teachings of the authorities of the church. The doctrine of pre-Adamites has never been accepted by the church and is viewed by the brethren as being in conflict with the revelations of the Lord. This is so with the temple ceremonies. References in other chapters to these two thoughts, the place of man in creation and pre-Adamites, should be eliminated." B.H. Roberts also wrote in his manuscript, The revelation given to Moses had reference not to the whole vast universe, but just this earth on which man lived and to its immediate heavens associated with it. And now, with the evidence of life and death on the earth so indisputably evident, so he didn't question really what the scientists were saying or how they got at their conclusions or things like that. He just accepted it out of hand, and that was his whole problem. It says, including the pre-Adamite life and death of man in various stages of a successive race life. Why not recognize that truth and see that which is inevitable, that in the advent of Adam, the time had come for the achievement of some special purpose in relation to man, some spiritual relationship that brought about the introduction of the Adamic dispensation? Otherwise, the whole volume of facts as they are disclosed are thrown into confusion, and the revealed truths themselves, for most men rendered doubtful, being out of harmony with the facts ascertained as to man's antiquity. So basically, this acceptance out of hand of the evolutionary viewpoints and understandings of the data basically leads a person into this direction where they can't accept the scriptural story as being very accurate, and they have to depart from it and make weird allowances and things like that and reinterpretations of the text in order to make sense and try to squish their evolution theory into it. And what it ends up doing is it ends up wreaking havoc on the religious text, and it destroys the idea that this is actual true history. So it's fraught with problems, unfortunately. You can see why the reading committee would have been cautious with such speculative thought that is manifestly out of harmony with the scriptures. Responding to the speculations in Roberts's book, as well as to the fact that Roberts began publicly teaching his unorthodox views, Joseph Fielding Smith publicly criticized Roberts' work by insinuation when speaking before the Genealogical Society of Utah, and approved the publishing of his comments. He said, "Even in the church there are a scattered few who are now advocating and contending that this earth was peopled with a race, perhaps many races, long before the days of Adam. These men desire, of course, to square the teachings in the Bible with the teachings of modern science and philosophy in regard to the age of the earth and life upon it. If you hear anyone talking this way, you may answer them by saying that the doctrine of pre-Adamites is not a doctrine of the church and is not advanced nor countenanced by the church. There is no warrant in the scriptures, not an authentic word to sustain it." And not even the word replenish, actually, I will add, because of that mistaken premise that both Elder Hyde and Elder Roberts fell into, as, meaning that, oh, there must have been people before Adam. Not even that word. No authentic word to sustain it. And the fight ensued. It caused a bit of a storm. The first presidency, still consisting of Heber J. Grant, Anthony W. Ivins, and Charles W. Nibley, ratified the reading committee's decision to not publish Roberts's work. President Grant thought that Elder Roberts's ideas were problematical and cannot be demonstrated, and noted of his counsels that we objected emphatically to the material. The two men, Smith and Roberts, presented their views before the First Presidency and the Council of the 12 in what was sort of a formal debate, with each one reading his prepared papers. Eventually, the First President's decision was essentially a plea to stop the controversy. President Grant wrote that the whole issue was the finest kind of things to be let alone entirely. And the First Presidency concluded that neither view on pre-Adamites would be accepted as doctrine at all for the church. Of course, just because Elder Smith's scriptural views were not enshrined as official at this point in time does not mean that they were invalidated, as we will see later with President Harold B. Lee making commentary on pre-Adamites as a president of the church. But yeah, I understand that neither side won the stamp of approval here, but the fact is that one side follows the scriptures and the other does not. And the scriptures are a foundation of our religion, not interpretations of Darwinism. And so which side should we err on, really, when we're taking a look at this kind of a controversy? Rather than alter his manuscript, Roberts chose to leave it unpublished. If he couldn't keep it how he wanted it, it would never see the light of day. This is in stark contrast to Elder Orson Pratt, the great scriptorian of the 19th century, another church authority who, when censored for writing things that were not quite correct, humbly admitted fault and accepted correction and repudiated his own former position. And what an embarrassing situation that must have been for a man of his intellect. And what humility that he showed on that occasion. What humility and what an incredible mind for this man, Orson Pratt. While B.H. Roberts was certainly exceptional, it was no doubt such lack of humility and unwillingness to accept correction on his part that saw to it that he never did become an apostle. Unfortunately, it may not seem like it from this presentation, but I really do love B.H. Roberts. But it is the case that he does compare unfavorably to Orson Pratt, his superior, on just about every level. And remember, these men were in similar shoes, both of them being asked to change their opinion on a certain thing. And Orson Pratt had the humility to do it. B.H. Roberts did not show that. And I would have liked to have seen B.H. Roberts called into the 12, but I do believe his obstinacy ultimately prevented it, as seen in this whole pre-Adamite case, which happened to be really right around the end of his life. Now we come to the misrepresented views of James E. Talmage and John A. Widtsoe. Many evolutionists in the church attempt to claim notable apostle scientists James E. Talmage and John A. Widtsoe to their side of the issue. Now here we have two very accomplished, very brilliant scientists who were apostles at the same time and through the same period as a lot of these First Presidency declarations and this very interesting time in the history of the church having to do with evolution, the first part of the 20th century. And so it's very much an interesting thing that they were apostles at this very time. And evolutionists in the church are always trying to claim them on their side. It is unfortunate that this myth has perpetuated among LDS evolutionists, and you keep hearing it over and over, but there is no justification in it. While both believed in an old earth and death before the fall of Adam, neither one came close to accepting evolution as the LDS evolutionists in our midst do today. They were not even close to what you guys think and believe. I can't believe you try to recruit them over to your side. Have you read their writings? Have you actually looked at what they wrote? Let's take a look. We're going to dive into it and see if what they believe matches up with your wholehearted acceptance of Darwinism. In fact, they were both harsh critics of the theory of evolution in several respects. It is evident that Elder Talmage openly acknowledged microevolution, and that's variation within the different kinds of animals that we can observe and demonstrate, such as the variety of dogs, as anyone would accept, but denied macroevolution, and that is the change of one kind of animal into another, such as from ape to man. He noted, attempts have been made to show that the present state of man is the culmination of a long course of development, higher forms having been evolved from inferior progenitors. Undoubtedly, much that is classed under the current title evolution is true. That part which comprises facts is true. And with equal assurance, be it said that much of the theory of evolutionists is error. No doubt the facts which are true were the observable, demonstrable variations of microevolution. The theory, which is error, would constitute the story of man evolving from apes and all the rest of the macroevolution tale. Otherwise, why would he phrase his message like that? This is also apparent from Elder Talmage's statement in his address, The Earth and Man, in 1931, which was given as his take on the Joseph Fielding Smith B.H. Roberts controversy. This speech does make some unscriptural concessions, such as death before the fall, while the world was passing through ages of preparation and an old earth. But these matters are quite trivial when considered to acceptance of the whole theory of evolution, lock, stock, and barrel, as we see among many LDS evolutionists and theological liberals. In this address, Elder Talmage made sure to stress that we believe that Adam was a real personage who stands at the head of his race chronologically. To my mind, Adam is a historic personage, not a prehistoric being, unidentified and uncertain. He also declared, I do not regard Adam as related to, certainly not as descended from, the Neanderthal, the Cro-Magnon, the Peking, or the Piltdown Man. Now, the Piltdown Man was actually a hoax, just so you know. They figured that out after 40 years, but Adam came as divinely directed, created, and empowered, and stands as the patriarchal head of his posterity. How many LDS evolutionists today would assert the same? And how does this accord with Darwinism? It does not. I'm willing to bet LDS evolutionists would take a look at this statement if they didn't know that it was attributed to James E. Talmage, and they would reject it. Elder Talmage made a distinction between the truth and falsehood that can be found within this scientific theory. He said, at best, the conception of the development of man's body from lower forms through evolutionary processes has been but a theory, an unproved hypothesis. Now, isn't that a stark contrast between a lot of the LDS evolutionists that we hear from, saying that evolution is a fact all the time, and if they say that mantra over and over, or if they just consider it so, then it becomes so. But no, it is an unproved hypothesis, as Elder Talmage points out. Now, they would completely disagree with him on this. They would say, oh, it's a fact, when he's saying, no, it's not. And he goes on, theories have their purpose and are indispensable, but they must never be mistaken for demonstrated facts. The Holy Scriptures should not be discredited by theories of men. So here we have, again, think back to the First Presidency's 1909 statement about these, however, are the theories of men, contrasting them with the Scriptures and talking about how Adam is the first man of all men. And then he goes on, and they cannot be discredited by fact and truth. So here we have the Holy Scriptures can't be discredited by what's the real truth. And it's very clear that evolution in his mind was not a demonstrative fact, and that he was holding to the Scriptures as far as it went with the origin of Adam. Finally, Elder Talmage declared, man is the child of God. He is born in the lineage of deity, not in the posterity of the brute creation. So that is very much exactly what the First Presidency statements have said about how the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, basing its belief on divine revelation, ancient and modern, proclaims man to be the offspring of deity, or in the lineage of deity, a direct offspring of deity. That's saying the exact same thing, and that he's not descended from animals. Of course, that's the corollary of a statement like that. If I were an evolutionist looking for an ally for my belief in Darwinism and my descent from scum, I wouldn't feel comfortable appealing to Elder Talmage. I really wouldn't. It's really silly how they pull him into their camp, entirely unjustified. Interesting how readily the evolutionists in the church overlook Elder Talmage's real teachings and jump to claim him as though he were a dyed-in-the-wool Darwinist. But that is far from the truth. As for Elder Widtsoe, when commenting upon the theory of evolution, he wrote, there is danger in confusing facts and theories. Let it not be held, however, that theories are in themselves objectionable. They play an important part in human progress. They are man's best inferential explanations of existing facts. The history of theories is largely the history of the world of thought. They have been stepping stones to the discovery of truth. Only when theories have been held aloft as unchanging facts or guides to life have they become dangerous in the search for truth. Well, isn't that exactly what has happened with the theory of evolution? It has become a guide to life because evolutionists see absolutely everything through their lens of Darwinism. And they call it the unifying theory that links all of science and things like that. Well, at that point, according to Elder Widtsoe, the theory becomes very much a danger. How often are we told by evolutionists in the church that their theory is a fact? And yet here we have Elder Widtsoe making a clear distinction between facts and inferences and warning against dogmatism with scientific theories. He continued, had the proponents as well as the opponents of evolution as a whole or in part kept in mind that they were discussing a theory subject to frequent and fundamental change, the civilized world would have been spared much unseemly behavior. Again, the warning: distinguish clearly between facts and the inferences from facts. He was emphatic about this idea of being able to distinguish between what's a fact and what is a story built on top of the fact, an interpretation of the fact. You have to keep those things separate in your mind or you're going to run into issues. Unfortunately, the evolutionists try to intentionally blur those lines. They want the story that they put on top of the facts to be accepted in exactly the same category as the facts themselves. He says, certainly it is a mistake to accept theories in building faith in anything from religion to our everyday life pursuits. John A. Widtsoe was consistently careful to stress the difference between facts and the interpretations of observed facts, which must be distinctly labeled as inferences and not confused with facts. Obviously, this has implications for evolution. It is a fact that fossils exist. How old they are, how they got where they were found, what their ancestors were, and what their progeny were can never be anything more than inferences and interpretations, and not facts in and of themselves. And think about how evolutionists and LDS evolutionists are constantly trying to blur the lines between the facts and their interpretations of the facts. The story that they build on top of the facts, they want that to be accepted in the exact same category as the facts themselves. But Elder Widtsoe is saying it is dishonest to do that, and you must create a distinction between those two things, the facts and what's an interpretation of facts. How often do LDS evolutionists mind that counsel? Or evolutionists in general, how often are they careful about making that kind of a distinction? And yet this is a very proper approach to a scientific inquiry, and it's completely ignored and trampled over by evolutionists who want you to just believe their interpretation of things. He says, no scientific worker worthy of his task attempts to give a scientific explanation a higher standing than that of an intelligent guess, supported by existing facts. Elder Widtsoe maintained, new discoveries may modify or upset the explanation. In an excellent treatise entitled, To What Extent Should the Doctrine of Evolution Be Accepted?, Elder Widtsoe discusses, without explicitly using the modern terms, the difference between microevolution, which is observable variations within basic kinds of animals, and macroevolution, which is the fantasy that all life evolved from a single-celled organism, is related to each other, and that man is descended from lower forms of life. In this address, Elder Widtsoe rejects macroevolution. Elder Widtsoe goes on here to point out what most every evolutionist is unwilling to admit, that while microevolution is observable and unanimously accepted, macroevolution must be accepted as a matter of belief. Though Elder Widtsoe did not use the terms microevolution or macroevolution in this somewhat archaic address, those are more modern terms, the ideas carried within those terms is clearly the exact distinction he was intending to make. He listed the major classes of evidence for evolution: fossils, homologous or similar structures, embryology, and microevolutionary changes in life forms, and said, "These facts, so claim the proponents of the theory of evolution, all point to the common origin and an advancing existence of all animal forms on Earth. To many minds, these observations, upon which in the main the theory of evolution rests, are sufficient proof to the correctness of the theory of evolution. Yet, at best, the doctrine of the common origin of all life is only an inference of science. After these many years of searching, its truth has not been demonstrated." Recall here that the First Presidency said, "Our religion is not hostile to real science. That which is demonstrated we accept with joy. But, on the other hand, vain philosophy, human theory, and mere speculations of men we do not accept, nor do we adopt anything contrary to divine revelation or to good common sense." And then here we have an apostle scientist telling us that evolution has not been demonstrated. And so it is not part of that which is demonstrated. So we can't accept evolution with joy, as some have tried to say, tried to spin this quote from the First Presidency. We cannot do that. It has not been demonstrated according to the prophets. And that was the obvious, clear implication from the First Presidency's message in the first place. But here we can corroborate it with the teachings of Elder Talmage and Elder Widtsoe that, you know what, evolution is not a demonstrated fact. So try to reconcile this statement with what you hear from evolutionists, particularly those in the church. Elder Widtsoe continued, "The doctrine of the common origin of life on Earth is but a scientific theory and should be viewed as such. Clear thinkers will distinguish between the general law of change, or evolution accepted by all," and here he's talking about microevolution, "and the special theories of evolution," and there he's talking about macroevolution, "which, like all scientific theories, are subject to variation with the increase of knowledge. Honest thinkers will not attempt to confuse law and theory in the minds of laymen. The man, learned or unlearned, who declares the doctrine of the common origin of life on earth to be demonstrated beyond doubt has yet to master the philosophy of science. The failure to differentiate between facts and inferences is the most grievous and the most common sin of scientists." Does that accord with what you hear from evolutionists or LDS evolutionists or the faculty at Brigham Young University in the biology faculty department? No, it doesn't, does it? Does this sound like someone who supports evolution theory? How do these inspired words compare with the garbage taught by the biology faculty at Brigham Young University? Very, very important questions to ask. In another treatise in the same work, Elder Widtsoe appealed to 16 different quotes from scientists that challenged the theory of evolution and cast doubt upon it. Does that sound like someone who believes in evolution, writing an article like that? Like Elder James E. Talmage, we cannot justify ourselves in saying that Elder John A. Widtsoe was a proponent of Darwinian evolution. Those LDS evolutionists who attempt to recruit these two apostles to their cause fly in the face of these apostles' own written words. Elder George F. Richards, the son of deceased Apostle Franklin D. Richards and the father of future Apostle LeGrand Richards, so that's 3 generations of Richards apostles, preached in April 1933 General Conference of the Church that the doctrine of the pre-existence confounds evolution as a false doctrine. Interestingly, what he taught on this occasion also dashes the hopes of those who say that evolution from lower animals is part of our eternal progression somehow, in some inexplicable way. It actually destroys that hope and that idea. He reasoned as follows. By an understanding of this principle of pre-existence, we understand the evolution of man, if that is a correct expression, or his eternal progress, following in the footsteps of the Savior, the firstborn, being born of God in the Spirit, having a spiritual existence, and then coming here upon the earth to have an earthly existence, passing on through death to another spiritual existence, and then the resurrection, and through faithfulness and obedience to the laws and ordinances of the gospel, go on to eternal life and exaltation. There is just the one individual from beginning to end. The fallacy of the reincarnation of man theory is here made apparent, as also the doctrine of evolution, in which it is taught that man originated with the lower animals, the very lowest type, and came up by degrees. Have there ever been statements by apostles that have left the door open for evolution? Strangely, there have been a few, and only a few. One of the statements that might be considered to be in this category is the 1910 Improvement Era article already discussed, which we have shown is almost definitely falsely attributed to Joseph F. Smith, so that one is crossed off the list. There are just a few situations in which one with apostolic authority left open the possibility of evolution, but did not proclaim it as truth as modern LDS evolutionists do, and that's important. The first such statement is from Elder Stephen L. Richards. Mind you, this statement does not openly come out and say anything to the effect that evolution is true. And this is significant because there is an abundance of statements that have said to the effect that evolution is false. Stephen L. Richards was a distinguished lawyer and close personal friend of David O. McKay. He was also destined to become a future member of President McKay's first presidency. And if you remember your church history, it was the calling of Stephen L. Richards into the first presidency when David O. McKay became president of the church that bumped J. Reuben Clark back down from first counselor to second counselor again. A very rare thing to have happen. It's only happened one other time to Elder Henry B. Eyring. But anyway, he was called to be an apostle, Elder Richards was, in 1917. In June of 1933, still as a member of the Council of the 12, Elder Richards included in the Improvement Era an open letter to college students in which he wrote, "If the evolutionary hypothesis of the creation of life and matter in the universe is ultimately found to be correct, and I shall neither be disappointed nor displeased if it shall turn out so to be, in my humble opinion, the biblical account is sufficiently comprehensive to include the whole of the process." Of course, Elder Richards was certainly in the vast minority with his humble opinion that the biblical account is sufficiently comprehensive to include the whole of the process of evolution. At no point in his letter did he demonstrate scriptural evidence of this comprehensiveness. It is just a statement that it could all work out. And this is often the case with those who support evolution. They don't really show you how it works with the scriptures, not very well, but they often just make the statement that, oh yeah, it could all just fit in there. So it's an unfortunate mistake. And neither is this statement tantamount, however, to a declaration of belief in evolution. It is a disavowal of certainty regarding the matter. He's not saying that this is what happened. He's saying that, well, hey, if they proved it true, I mean, that would be fine, is basically what he's saying. Notwithstanding his tentative approval of evolution, Elder Richards did close his letter with these words: "Never abandon a time-tested thing of worth until you are very, very sure that the new is better. Be not ashamed of faith in God. So in other words, don't throw out your beliefs. This advice, if followed, would incline a person to disbelieve in evolution. It is very apparent that Elder Richards was simply attempting to give practical advice to students to not mortgage their testimony of the gospel for scientific theory. But of course, evolutionists in the church will take something like this and they will just latch onto that as, oh, well, look at that, that means that evolution is fine to believe in. So, but let's see, there is more to the story with Elder Richards. Notwithstanding this peculiar allowance by Stephen L. Richards, he had a definite change of opinion later. What happened was fellow apostle Joseph F. Merrill, who was also a scientist like Elders Widtsoe and Talmage, recommended a book to Elder Richards called The Origin of Mankind by Sir John Ambrose Fleming, a creationist. In 1955, while Stephen L. Richards was a member of the First Presidency, he released a book called Where is Wisdom?, in which he criticized the theory of evolution for almost 24 pages, drawing heavily from Fleming's book. President Richards' book, Where is Wisdom?, was glowingly endorsed by David O. McKay, who wrote the foreword to the book. So I think that tells us a lot about Elder Richards, or President Richards, and Elder Merrill, who was an apostle and scientist and largely quiet about evolution, and David O. McKay, all three of them. I mean, this book is very anti-evolutionary. When you look at it, it kind of goes on and on about it. And it's very much taking its cue from Fleming, the creationist. Next, the latter half of the 20th century. In 1954, a landmark book on the subject of organic evolution was published by Joseph Fielding Smith, longtime outspoken opponent of evolution, and by then the president of the Quorum of the 12. The name of the book was called Man, His Origin and Destiny. The book was, of course, controversial, particularly among doctrinally liberal members of the church who didn't accept the scriptures fully. But the book was very much a success in educating and helping guide members of the church in the right way to think about this important topic. The book is a masterful work in excess of 500 pages, which systematically rebuts all of the major arguments of evolution theory using both scripture and science. Not only did the book consider all of the major arguments then existing in favor of evolution and successfully refuted them, it also very ably demolished higher criticism, the idea that the scriptures are full of fables and not written by the claimed authors. It brought together in one volume an excellent case against the theory of evolution as it conflicts with the restored gospel. Here was the comprehensive creationist book that the Latter-day Saint community was needing. It was a tremendous accomplishment and to this day stands as a pillar of excellence and scriptural integrity. It is an effective reference and a powerful standard of truth on this subject of evolution. Now, of course, there are many liberals and evolutionists within the church who ridicule this book, but I am convinced, judging by the things they say, that few of them have ever taken the time to read it. The book anticipates and answers the arguments that they thoughtlessly throw up against it. It is usually simply disdainfully dismissed by liberal Mormons without directly engaging its contents. Instead, opponents of this phenomenal book are content to mischaracterize it and turn it into a caricature of itself, and then think that they have won the day. They are wrong. Perhaps if they could tear themselves away from their evolution indoctrination reading material and showed sufficient interest in their religion and its scriptures to consider a side that would support those things, they might learn wisdom. But few such liberals and LDS evolutionists have the requisite humility for that, I'm afraid.
Now let's discuss the splash that this book made. There was some concern that since President Smith was then president of the Quorum of the 12, that the book might represent an official statement of the church. In order to assure members of the church that they were not required to accept any particular view about origins as a required article of faith, even if they were disregarding the scriptures, it was necessary to put the minds of the liberals at ease to avoid mass hysteria. To this end, President J. Reuben Clark gave a talk entitled, "When Are the Writings or Sermons of Church Leaders Entitled to the Claim of Scripture?" in 1954. President David O. McKay also answered written queries from concerned evolutionists in the church, assuring them that Man, His Origin and Destiny was not an official publication of the church. In 1974, after the death of President Smith, an evolutionist academic and church member named Dwayne Jeffrey wrote an article theorizing about the strife that Man, His Origin, and Destiny caused among the Council of the 12. In response to this, President Ezra Taft Benson had strong words. He said, "More recently, one of our church educators published what he purports to be a history of the church's stance on the question of organic evolution. His thesis challenges the integrity of a prophet of God. He suggested that Joseph Fielding Smith published his work, Man, His Origin and Destiny, against the counsel of the First Presidency and his own brethren. This writer's interpretation is not only inaccurate, but it also runs counter to the testimony of Elder Mark E. Peterson, who wrote the foreword to Elder Smith's book, a book I would encourage all to read. Elder Peterson said, 'Some of us,' that's members of the Council of the 12, urged President Joseph Fielding Smith to write a book on the creation of the world and the origin of man. The present volume is the result. It is a most remarkable presentation of material from both sources, that's science and religion, under discussion. It will fill a great need in the church and will be particularly invaluable to students who have become confused by the misapplication of information derived from scientific experimentation.' When one understands that the author to whom I alluded is an exponent of the theory of organic evolution, his motive in disparaging President Joseph Fielding Smith becomes apparent. To hold to a private opinion on such matters is one thing, but when one undertakes to publish his views to discredit the work of a prophet, it is a very serious matter. It is also apparent to all who have the Spirit of God in them that Joseph Fielding Smith's writings will stand the test of time." And so we have here a refutation of those types of ideas that try to discredit President Smith's book and his the circumstances surrounding his publishing the book, and also that his work will stand the test of time, that it is indeed true. One important person that LDS evolutionists constantly try to claim for their camp is the great prophet David O. McKay. President McKay was president of the church for an impressive 19 years, holds the record for longest serving person in the First Presidency or the Quorum of the 12, and is fondly remembered for his many wonderful and insightful teachings. Is it true that David O. McKay espoused evolution, as the liberals among our number often claim? What is the basis for such thoughts? In a BYU speech to young college students in 1952, David O. McKay, after discoursing on the necessity of a proper, gospel-centered education, said the following: "Millikan is right," and Millikan was a scientist, "when he says science without religion obviously may become a curse rather than a blessing to mankind. But science, dominated by the spirit of religion, is the key progress and hope of the future. For example, evolution's beautiful theory of the creation of the world offers many perplexing problems to the inquiring mind. Inevitably, a teacher who denies the divine agency in creation, who insists there is no intelligent purpose in it will infest the student with the thought that all may be chance. I say that no youth should be so led without a counterbalancing thought. Even the skeptic teacher should be fair enough to see that even Charles Darwin, when he faced this great question of annihilation, that the creation is dominated only by chance, wrote, "It is an intolerable thought that man and all other sentient beings are doomed to complete annihilation after such long, continued, slow progress." Evolutionists in the church make a lot of President McKay's use of the descriptor beautiful for evolution. But does this statement really read that favorably for evolution? Let's examine all the negative phrases associated with evolution in this quote. We have a curse rather than a blessing to mankind. Offers many perplexing problems to the inquiring mind. Infest the student with the thought that all may be chance. Intolerable thought. That's 4 negative thoughts to 1 positive thought in a single paragraph. I mean, when you have 4 other phrases in this one paragraph versus 1 word, beautiful, in this one single paragraph, that seems like an overwhelming negative attitude towards evolution, tipping the scales to the side of a negative view of evolution, absolutely. But they hang on that 1 word, beautiful. Much is made by evolutionists within the church of President McKay's use of the descriptor beautiful for the theory of evolution, and they treat it as an endorsement of Darwinism. And after all the long line of prophets and apostles that have denounced evolution very emphatically and vehemently, because President McKay used this 1 word, beautiful, to describe evolution, all of a sudden, they latch onto that and, President McKay was endorsing Darwinism. Well, that is so ridiculous. This seems a stretch, however, and it certainly wouldn't tip the scales even if it was an endorsement of Darwinism. But anyway, personally, I think the proper interpretation of this statement is this. President McKay was simply saying that though evolution may have aesthetic appeal to some, it by itself is spiritually dangerous and fails to answer the great questions of life. And I think that's apparent from reading that whole paragraph. Interestingly, President McKay gave this statement in the April 1968 General Conference, read by his son, David Lawrence McKay, because he was very old at the time. Except this time, the confusing adjective beautiful was omitted, and the entire context reads quite unfavorably towards evolution. So we hear a lot about no official position, and where does that come from? Well, it kind of stems from President McKay, and we're going to dive into the circumstances surrounding that to get a bit of an understanding. So another circumstance that pleases LDS evolutionists is a private written correspondence that President McKay had with a Professor William Stokes in 1957, in which President McKay wrote in answer to inquiry. Remember, President McKay was writing letters providing answers to questions from such evolutionists who were getting really upset about Joseph Fielding Smith's book, A Man, His Origin and Destiny, and this is one such letter. President McKay wrote, "On the subject of organic evolution, the Church has officially taken no position. The book Man, His Origin and Destiny was not published by the Church and is not approved by the Church. The book contains expressions of the author's views for which he alone is responsible." And that's essentially it. That's what he wrote. Of course, Stokes, an evolutionist, made as much of this letter as he could, and so do evolutionists today. So he made it a big deal, and he circulated it and everything to promote his theory of evolution. But this is a release from any church sanction that a person might face for believing evolution, not an endorsement of Darwinism. The letter does not say evolution is true or evolution is right or anything like that. It's just saying, okay, if you want to believe in evolution, you're not going to be sanctioned by the church for doing so. That's all it says. Elder Boyd K. Packer spoke about this letter in a 1990 symposium. He remarked, "I should take note of one letter signed by a president of the church addressed to a private individual. It includes a sentence which, taken out of context, reads, 'On the subject of organic evolution, the church has officially taken no position.' For some reason, the addressee passed this letter about. For years, it has appeared each time the subject is debated." Letters to individuals are not the channel for announcing the policy of the church. For several important reasons, this letter itself is not a declaration of the position of the church, as some have interpreted it to be. Do not anchor your position on this major issue to that one sentence. It is in conflict with the two official declarations, each signed by all members of the First Presidency. Remember the revelation in the Doctrine and Covenants. Every decision made by the First Presidency must be by the unanimous voice of the same. That is, every member must be agreed to its decisions. Unless this is the case, their decisions are not entitled to the same blessings which the decisions of a quorum of 3 presidents were anciently, who were ordained after the order of Melchizedek and were righteous and holy men. So, of course, this one letter to a private individual does not carry the same kind of weight that 3 or 2, depending on how you're counting these official declarations, have, where they're all signed by the 3 members of the First Presidency. Of course it doesn't carry that same amount of weight. In fact, in another letter written only a few years later on the same subject, President McKay said essentially the same thing, but then included these words. This is the letter they don't like to talk about very much. He said, "Evolution is a theory. You say that biologists would agree on the general lines of what happened, although there may be less agreement about just how it happened. While scientific people themselves differ in their interpretations and views of the theory, any conflicts which may seem to exist between the theory and the truths of revealed religion can well be dealt with by suspending judgment as long as may be necessary to arrive at facts and at a complete understanding of the truth." So that does not seem very pro-evolution to me. It certainly doesn't. It changes the whole tenor of the letter, and the rest of this letter is very much like the other one written in 1957, saying, basically that the church will not sanction someone for believing in evolution, blah, blah, blah. And then this, evolution is a theory, why don't you suspend judgment on it? Okay, so next there was a Professor Sterling M. McMurrin who claimed that in 1954 David O. McKay told him in private confidence, "I believe in evolution." And of course, all LDS evolutionists take McMurrin on his word. But should we really place such confidence in McMurrin? I mean, it was told in private confidence. We just have to believe McMurrin. And after all, he was an apostate who did not believe that the Book of Mormon was genuine. He was also a critic of orthodoxy in our religion. Whether this anecdote is accurate or not, of course, is impossible to say. But let us grant that it is. Suppose President McKay did admit, "I believe in evolution." If that were the case, it is very likely that he was thinking of the observable processes of microevolution, that is, the variety produced within the basic kinds of animals, when he espoused belief. It is very common for people who want to make it clear that they believe in microevolution but not macroevolution to have trouble articulating that well, especially in the 1950s. When people today grope for words to explain this distinction, they often say awkward things like, "Well, I believe some evolution." If McMurrin's account is even accurate, I'm sure that it is explainable in some way just like this. Also, the idea that President McKay believed in evolution would strongly seem to contradict his publicly stated views. He said, Charles Darwin, as he contemplated the greatest descent or origin in his mind of the human family, his theory, he finally came to the point that there will come a time when the human family will end. If that theory is right, all sentient beings known as man cannot live. Yeah, that sounds really friendly towards evolution. He also said, shortly after the publication of Man, His Origin and Destiny, the stern fact of life is that animals, as other living things, can grow and produce their kind only in accordance with fixed laws of nature and the divine command, let the earth bring forth the living creatures after his kind, cattle and creeping things, and the beast of the earth after his kind. And once again, yeah, that sounds really friendly towards evolution. Yeah, that's really congruent with evolution. No, I'm sorry to be sarcastic, but really, like, we can't claim David O. McKay as a proponent of evolution when he says things like this. Does this sound like the sentiment from a staunch or even closeted believer in evolution? I hardly think so. George Q. Morris had been a longtime school friend of David O. McKay, and eventually, during the presidency of David O. McKay, he was called into the apostleship. George Q. Morris had the distinction of being the oldest man to have been called into the apostleship, being 80 years old at the time of his call. Elder Morris spoke out against evolution in 1956 General Conference when he remarked about a young person of his acquaintance. He said, I'm concerned for all of our young people as they go into the field of higher education and meet all the ideas that are so prevalent, which are in sharp conflict with the revelations of God that we know to be true. I suppose he had been taught something about the origin of man according to the theory of organic evolution. I presume he might have been told that what I remember reading in some man's writings, that we would have to look for our origin in some minute life in the ocean, perhaps, or in some amoeba-like organism, the simplest form of life. That, he said, was man's beginning, but we know better than that. So we know better as Latter-day Saints, and we ought to know better. Later in the April 1959 General Conference, after quoting an evolutionist's postulations, Elder Romney commented, I repeat that in our peculiar beliefs and faith in Jesus Christ, comprising the foregoing and other revealed truths concerning him, we greatly differ from other people of the earth. So we differ from Darwinists, is what he was saying. Speaking in derision during the April 1969 conference, Elder Romney said, Satan, our enemy, is making an all-out assault upon righteousness. His well-marshaled forces are legion. Our children and youth are the targets of his main thrust. They are everywhere subjected to wicked and vicious propaganda. Man, so our children are told, is an animal, the product of biological evolution. They are playthings to be exploited and prostituted for the gratification of sensual and lustful desires. He then suggested the remedy for this false teaching. If our children are to be sufficiently strengthened to stand against this satanic onslaught, they must be taught and trained in the home as the Lord has directed. And hopefully we are training our children in our home to disbelieve these types of teachings that we're animals or that we descended from animals. Finally, as the second counselor in the first presidency, President Romney gave a stirring address in the April 1973 General Conference entitled Man, a Child of God. In it he taught, it is the universal law of nature in the plant, animal, and human worlds for reproducing offspring to reach in final maturity the likeness of their parents. The theory that man is other than the offspring of God has been, and so long as it is accepted and acted upon, will continue to be, a major factor in blocking man's spiritual growth and in corrupting his morals. The concept that man is a beast relieves him of a sense of accountability and encourages him to adopt the fatalistic attitude of eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. Elder Delbert L. Stapley of the Council of the 12 also confirmed in a BYU speech in 1962 that mankind did not evolve from animals, but that he came from a higher source. Elder Stapley taught, God revealed to Moses that he created man in his own image and after his likeness. How lofty and inspiring this knowledge is to his children here on the earth, to know that they have not evolved from some lower organism of life, as teachers of evolution would have us believe, but are the literal offspring of deity. Man's evolution does not concern his origin and beginning. God determined the fact of his form and creation, but man's evolution as a son of God is to rise towards the likeness of his eternal Father in heaven by perfecting his God-given abilities and powers, which, in an embryonic state, are like God's, but presently are not fully developed. And that's kind of the Mormon view of evolution once again. If you think back to the 1925 First Presidency statement, we're evolving into a God, but remember, like George F. Richards taught, we're the same person through this entire experience. We don't detour into a stage of evolving through animals. Elder Stapley taught the same doctrine again at BYU in 1964. He said, the scriptures teach us that we are descended from the lineage of the gods. Therefore, we are created in their likeness and image, in both spirit and body. We are endowed with like character traits, qualities, and powers. We are not the product of evolution from some lower organism of life, as man speculates and would have us believe. Not long after this, Elder Stapley also taught in General Conference, men who by search and research discover the truths of the kingdom of heaven may have to abandon many of their cherished traditions and even their theories of imperfect philosophy and science if they would possess the pearl of great price, God's kingdom. So if you come into God's kingdom, he's saying, you're going to have to abandon these kinds of false theories. Richard L. Evans, the apostle well loved for performing the spoken word in conjunction with the Mormon Tabernacle Choir's weekly performances, gave the following message on May 22, 1966. He was also the editor of the Improvement Era, the forerunner to the Ensign magazine, from which this quote appears. Note that the ideas contained in the passage cited are not original to Elder Evans, as he is quoting the words of John Muir, a Scottish-American scientist, conservationist, sent to him by a thoughtful listener. Nevertheless, here is what he quoted. So the first little bit is Elder Evans's words, and then the last part of the quote is actually John Muir. So it goes, and as we look out upon life, the air, the sea, the mountains, the morning, and all the complexity and interdependence, the most marvelous and infinite mechanism, we may know that there is intelligence, order, power, purpose, and that we are part of that purpose. This wonderful awareness of our world suggests citing some further lines from John Muir, sent by a thoughtful listener, lines that wonderfully set aside a creation of chance or of an unknowing, unfeeling mechanistic machine. Every motion of the constantly shifting bodies in the world, he said, is timed to the occasion for some definite, foreordered end. The flowers blossom in obedience to the same law that marks the course of constellations. Nature is one, and to me the greatest delight of observation and study is to new unities in this all-embracing and eternal harmony. Men, with only a book of knowledge, have seized upon evolution as an escape from the idea of God. Evolution, a wonderful mouth-filling word. Just say evolution, and you have explained every phenomenon of nature and explained away God. It sounds big and wise. Evolution, they say, brought the earth through its glacial periods and caused the snow blanket to recede and the flower carpet to follow it, raised the forests of the world, developed animal life, from the jellyfish to the thinking man. But what caused evolution? There they stick. To my mind, it is inconceivable that a plan that has worked out the development of beauty, that has made every microscopic particle of matter perform its function in harmony with every other in the universe, that such a plan is the blind product of an unthinking abstraction. No, somewhere before evolution was an intelligence. You may call that intelligence what you please. I cannot see why so many people object to call it God. What is very conspicuous is what was left out of the quote. Would you like to know what was said in its entirety by John Muir, which was excised by Elder Evans? The deleted portions appear below in red. So John Muir said, "But what caused evolution? There they stick. To my mind, it is inconceivable that a plan that has worked out through unthinkable millions of years without one hitch or one mistake," so that part was taken out, "the development of beauty that has made every microscopic particle of matter perform its function in harmony with every other in the universe, that such a plan is the blind product of an unthinking abstraction. No, somewhere before evolution was an intelligence that laid out the plan, and evolution is the process, not the origin of the harmony." And again, that part was taken out, stricken from the quote by Elder Evans. If, therefore, Elder Evans believed that the earth was millions of years old, why did he cut that part out of the quote? And if Elder Evans regarded evolution as the process of creation like John Muir did, why did he drop that portion from the quote? Due to Elder Evans's judgment in altering the quote, it seems a bit of a stretch to say that he was an advocate of evolution as the possible process of creation. But since he didn't leave evolution out of this inspirational quote completely, we'll concede and say that this may be an example, like that of Stephen L. Richards in 1933, of an apostle leaving the door open for the possibility of evolution as a process. We'll give it to them, but it's weak.
Scriptural stalwarts speak out against evolution. So we've already talked a lot about Joseph Fielding Smith. He was the son of Joseph F. Smith, who gave two of the statements against evolution, the 1909 Origin of Man statement and the 1910 Words in a Season statement that was the "that which is demonstrated we accept with joy" statement from the First Presidency. And he was also thereby the grandson of Hiram Smith, and was a widely recognized authority on the Scriptures and doctrine. In 1938, President Heber J. Grant wrote privately that, "I consider Joseph Fielding Smith the best posted man on the Scriptures of the general authorities of the church that we have." Joseph Fielding Smith was called as an apostle at the young age of 33 in 1910, served in that quorum for nearly 60 years, 19 years as the president of that quorum, that is, for the entire presidency of his predecessor David O. McKay, and finally was permitted by the Lord to succeed as president of the church at the grand age of 93. Never before or since had such a seasoned apostle ascended to the presidency of the church. No doubt his ascendancy to the presidency of the church can be interpreted as a vindication of his long ministry. Joseph Fielding Smith was consistently opposed to evolution theory throughout his long tenure as an apostle. In addition to the masterpiece Man, His Origin and Destiny, President Smith wrote an abundance on the topic of evolution. His attitude toward it can be summed up in these statements from Doctrines of Salvation. This idea that everything commenced from a small beginning, from the scum of the surface of the sea, and has gradually developed until all forms of life, the beasts of the field and fowls of the air, and the fishes of the sea, and the plants upon the face of the earth, have all sprung from that one source, is a falsehood absolutely. There is no truth in it, for God has given us His Word, by which we may know, and all who are led by the Spirit of God can understand, through that Holy Spirit, the truth of these things.
I say most emphatically, you cannot believe in this theory of the origin of man and at the same time accept the plan of salvation as set forth by the Lord our God. You must choose the one and reject the other, for they are in direct conflict, and there is a gulf separating them which is so great that it cannot be bridged, no matter how much one may try to do so. And that is certainly the case, and I actually demonstrate that that's the case in my earlier video, Are There Scriptural Problems with Evolution? Another equally adamant opponent of evolution was Joseph Fielding Smith's son-in-law, Elder Bruce R. McConkie. In fact, Elder McConkie was so famous for his opposition to the theory that when many LDS evolutionists balk at the prophet's teachings on the matter, they almost exclusively focus their displeasure on Bruce R. McConkie, as though he was the only one to teach against evolution, or the main one to teach against evolution, when really he was a strong voice against evolution, but he was only one voice among many. So the reason for that is probably the long entry on evolution in his famous book Mormon Doctrine, written while he was yet 70. After approaching the subject from multiple angles and destroying the theory in several respects, he concluded unequivocally, there is no harmony between the truths of revealed religion and the theories of organic evolution. There were frequent other denunciations of evolution by Elder McConkie, both in public speaking venues and in written works. For instance, in a notable 1980 BYU speech, he included evolution as the second of 7 deadly heresies that plague some members of the church. In another speech, he labeled evolution as one of the doctrines that weaken faith and may damn. In a later written work, he referred to evolution as a false philosophy that leads men away from God and salvation. In an official article in the Ensign magazine, which he was asked to author on the subject of creation, Elder McConkie related the circumstances of the Garden of Eden, the fall of man, and the change to a natural state of being. He wrote, "There is no evolving from one species to another in any of this." And his final written work, still unpublished when he died, referred to evolution as a heresy and the false view of many self-designated scientists, noting that the tendency among them is to present Darwinian theories as established realities, and we talked about that quite at length with Elder Widtsoe. And he said, or when in the fact they were certainly not. So when he also submitted that those members of the church who accepted such theories are those whose faith falls short of the divine standard. Marky Peterson, an insightful and prolific apostle, was another that spoke out strongly against evolution, and not without knowledge of the details of the theory. He queried students in a 1973 speech at BYU, "Do you believe that there was an Adam described in the Scriptures as the first man? Do you believe there was such a thing as Adam's transgression, some called the fall? Now I ask you, can you believe in Adam and in Darwinian evolution at the same time? Our religion teaches that there was no death in the world before the fall. Do you believe that?" Elder Peterson wrote at length in his book, Adam, Who Is He?, about the failure of evolutionists to provide evidence for macroevolution. Again, changes from one basic kind of animal to another basic kind. He also criticized the veracity of radiocarbon dating and other assumptive approaches that evolution is built on, and concluded, "The endless evolutionary voyages into the seas of speculation certainly cannot be allowed to destroy our faith in divine revelation, which revelation completely refutes these hypotheses." Elder Peterson included a similar lengthy discussion in his subsequent book, Moses, Man of Miracles. It is notable that several presidents of the church in the latter part of the 20th century spoke against evolution or made implications of its falsity while they were president of the church. Pictured left is President Harold B. Lee, an apostle since 1941. At the time of his call, he was by far the youngest man in the Quorum of the 12 by 20 years, being only 42 years old. He was called into the 12 after showing his capability as the architect of the church welfare system, and while an apostle, also spearheaded the modernization of church organization through priesthood correlation, so he was a very able administrator. Elder Lee was then called as the first counselor to President Joseph Fielding Smith in 1970. If you look closely, in the background of this photo, you will see the books Signs of the Times and Take Heed to Yourselves by Joseph Fielding Smith sitting upon his desk. In July of 1972, Elder Lee ascended to the office of President of the Church after only 31 years as an apostle. Almost half of the time his predecessor Joseph Fielding Smith. President Lee also had the distinction of calling Bruce R. McConkie into the Quorum of the 12 in October 1972, 14 years after the first publication of Mormon Doctrine. President Harold B. Lee wrote a relevant article in his December 1972 First Presidency message while he was president of the church. He related the following story in which he was frustrated by a seemingly good church member's belief in Darwinist theories. He said, "I was somewhat sorrowed recently to hear someone, a sister, who came from a church family, ask, 'What about the pre-Adamic people?' Here was someone who I thought was fully grounded in the faith. I asked, 'What about the pre-Adamic people?' She replied, 'Well, aren't there evidences that people preceded the Adamic period of the earth?' She wondered about the creation because she had read the theories of the scientists, and the question that she was really asking was, how do you reconcile science with religion? The answer must be, if science is not true, you cannot reconcile truth with error. And then he goes on, I say that we need to teach our people to find their answers in the Scriptures. If only each of us would be wise enough to say that we aren't able to answer any question unless we can find a doctrinal answer in the Scriptures. And if we hear someone teaching something that is contrary to what is in the Scriptures, each of us may know whether the things spoken are false. It is as simple as that. But the unfortunate thing is that so many of us are not reading the Scriptures. We do not know what is in them, and therefore we speculate about the things we ought to have found in the Scriptures themselves. So, the pre-Adamites is his example. That's the example he's using to make this point. And then he says, I think that therein is one of our biggest dangers of today. And not only pre-Adamites, but he brought up, the creation and theories of the scientists. So that's talking about evolution, obviously. In the year 2000, Harold B. Lee's teachings were the curriculum for the church's Priesthood Relief Society that year. It's obvious that the selections in the book were screened by the editors, understanding that it would be a worldwide curriculum for the church. It contains and therefore approves of this teaching from President Lee. Besides the fall having had to do with Adam and Eve, causing a change to come over them, that change affected all human nature and all of the natural creations. All of the creation of animals, plants, all kinds of life were changed. The earth itself became subject to death. How it took place no one can explain, and anyone who would attempt to make an explanation would be going far beyond anything the Lord has told us. But a change was wrought over the whole face of creation, which up to that time had not been subject to death. From that time henceforth, all in nature was in a state of gradual dissolution until mortal death was to come, after which there would be required a restoration in a resurrected state. So that's very anti-evolutionary because it's talking about a change in the creation, which was once, a perfect state, and becoming subject to death, which had not previously been the case. I distinctly remember reading about a BYU professor after giving a lecture on evolution during some special event being asked about this very phrase in the Harold B. Lee manual, which was current for that year. The professor, like any liberal Mormon, said he considered that teaching to be President Lee's opinion only. And yeah, that's what the liberal Mormons and LDS evolutionists always default to, that, that's their opinion, even if there's a prevailing pattern of apostles and presidents of the church and prophets teaching a certain doctrine. Even if there's a consistency, a prevailing pattern of it, this, oh, it's their opinion, and their opinion, their opinion. Well, no, when there is a pattern, it's not just opinion. We can't just brush it off like that. But that's what they do all the time, so they can bend and twist their theory into things. Evidently, the church is careless about putting wild opinions into its worldwide curriculum manuals, and evolution is true without any doubt. How ridiculous. I can see a loose supervision of what is put into church manuals in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, or even 60s. But in the year 2000? Give me a break. While we're allowed to believe in evolution if we choose, the message from the church is clear about what they want us to believe. President Spencer W. Kimball had a lot of great teachings, although he didn't spend much time with evolution. However, he did give some statements that indicate his attitude on the matter. In an address given just months before becoming president of the church, so this was a little bit before he was president of the church, President Kimball quoted Genesis 2:24 and said, "This was not the evolution of Adam to human status. Adam was already an intelligent, trained, and knowledgeable man. He was a prophet in his first recorded days on the earth. And this prophet blessed God and prophesied concerning his posterity. Their children, 33 sons and 23 daughters, according to Josephus, were taught to read and write in the language which was pure and undefiled. Adam and his righteous sons were baptized, received the Holy Ghost, and received the priesthood. They kept the genealogical records of their fast expanding families. This would indicate then that Adam was a great man when we first are introduced to him. He didn't come from the jungle." President Ezra Taft Benson also spoke out against evolution during his presidency. This was done in the form of his earlier teachings being reprinted during his time as president of the church. In his book, Come Unto Christ, the last printing of which was in 1986, while he was president of the church and still very active, he included the following: "We should not assume that public schools always reinforce teachings given in the home concerning ethical and moral conduct. We have seen introduced into many school systems false ideas about the theory of man's development from lower forms of life, teachings that there are no absolute values, attempts to repudiate beliefs regarded as supernatural, permissive attitudes towards sexual freedom that give sanction to immoral behavior, and alternative lifestyles such as lesbianism, homosexuality, and other perverse practices." In 1988, President Benson reprinted several of his earlier apostolic talks in a book called A Witness and a Warning. In this profound book, he included the following: "Now we have not been using the Book of Mormon as we should. Our homes are not as strong unless we are using it to bring our children to Christ. Our families may be corrupted by worldly trends and teachings unless we know how to use the book to expose and combat the falsehoods in organic evolution." And who could forget his emphatic warning while president of the Quorum of the 12, so before he was president of the church, but it shows his thoughts on the matter. He says, "As a watchman on the tower, I feel to warn you that one of the chief means of misleading our youth and destroying the family unit is our educational institutions. There is more than one reason why the church is advising our youth to attend colleges close to their homes where institutes of religion are available. It gives the parents the opportunity to stay close to their children, and if they become alerted and informed, these parents can help expose some of the deceptions of men like Charles Darwin." While he was president of the church, Howard W. Hunter released a book of his teachings that provides insight into the question of evolution. Speaking against the trend of modernists to liberalize the scriptures and cast doubt upon their accuracy and historicity, Howard W. Hunter denounced them and asked rhetorically, "The Old Testament unfolds the story of the creation of the earth and mankind by God. Should we now disregard this account and modernize the creation according to the theories of the modernists? Can we say there was no Garden of Eden or an Adam and Eve? Because modernists now declare that the story of the flood is unreasonable and impossible, should we disbelieve the account of Noah and the flood as related to the Old Testament?" So clearly he was against those kinds of ideas. While he never showed much interest in discussing the issue, President Gordon B. Hinckley also disavowed belief in evolution. He said, "I believe in evolution, not organic evolution, as it is called, but in the evolution of the mind, the heart, and the soul of man. I believe in improvement. I believe in growth." So he was very clear that he didn't believe organic evolution. Of course, several apostles in the latter part of the 20th century have spoken out against evolution. Two voices that we have not yet considered are Boyd K. Packer and Russell M. Nelson. Boyd K. Packer has been a consistent voice against the false doctrine of evolution. He declared in the 1983 October General Conference, "When we understand the doctrine of premortal life, then things fit together and make sense. We then know that little boys and little girls are not monkeys, nor are their parents, nor were their parents to the very beginning generation." And he proclaimed in General Conference just 1 year later, "No lesson is more manifest in nature than that all living things do as the Lord commanded in the creation. They reproduce after their own kind. They follow the pattern of their parentage. Everyone knows that. Every 4-year-old knows that. A bird will not become an animal nor a fish. A mammal will not beget reptiles, nor do men gather figs of thistles. In the countless billions of opportunities in the reproduction of living things, one kind does not beget another. If a species ever does cross, the offspring cannot reproduce. The pattern for all life is the pattern of the parentage." This is demonstrated in so many obvious ways, even an ordinary mind should understand it. Surely no one with reverence for God could believe that his children evolved from slime or from reptiles, although one can easily imagine that those who accept the theory of evolution don't show much enthusiasm for genealogical research. The theory of evolution, and it is a theory, will have an entirely different dimension when the workings of God in creation are fully revealed. And I think he has in mind the concept of the Mormon view of evolution, where the way that we evolve is not, from lower forms of life into human beings, but it's from, an intelligence into a spirit, and then into a mortal body, and then eventually into a god. And that's where we're headed, but we don't make this detour into animal realm somehow. He goes, "Since every living thing follows the pattern of its parentage, are we to suppose that God had some other strange pattern in mind for his offspring? Surely we, his children, are not, in the language of science, a different species than he is." As a renowned heart surgeon, then Elder Russell M. Nelson was no stranger to science, biology, and anatomy, and yet he has been a consistent voice against evolution. Elder Nelson wrote in his 1988 book, The Power Within Us, a firm denunciation of the theory of evolution. He said, "Through the ages, some persons without scriptural understanding have tried to explain our existence by pretentious words such as ex nihilo, out of nothing. Others have deduced that because of certain similarities between different forms of life, there has been a natural selection of the species, or organic evolution, from one form to another. Still others have concluded that man came as a consequence of a big bang, which resulted in the creation of our planet and life upon it. To me, such theories are unbelievable. Could an explosion in a printing shop produce a dictionary? It's unthinkable. One might argue that it is within a remote realm of possibility, but even if that could happen, such a dictionary could certainly not heal its own torn pages, renew its own worn corners, or reproduce its own subsequent editions. It is incumbent upon each informed and spiritually attuned person to help overcome such foolishness of those who would deny divine creation, or think that mankind simply evolved. By the Spirit we perceive the truer and more believable wisdom of God." So regarding biology being taught at BYU, many Latter-day Saint evolutionists have assumed that evolution has the church's stamp of approval, or that it is compatible with the gospel. And here's why: because it is found among the science curriculum at BYU. In fact, the science faculty itself, particularly the biology department, vehemently pushes this perception. This is not what the prophets have taught us, however. The prophets have been consistent in the thought that while evolution is taught at BYU, which is appropriate for an accredited university, we are not to thereby accept it as true. Harold B. Lee taught, "This institution, Brigham Young University, must turn out the best scientists. We want them to turn out the best philosophers to be found in any of the schools. But we want those scientists and philosophers thus trained to measure the theory of their science and philosophy by the truths of the gospel of Jesus Christ." Does the biology faculty follow this admonition properly? No, they do not. Instead, they are actively trying to convert the student body over to evolution and Darwinism. This will be to their everlasting shame. Likewise, Ezra Taft Benson taught in General Conference, "If your children are taught untruths on evolution in the public schools, or even in our church schools, provide them with a copy of President Joseph Fielding Smith's excellent rebuttal in his book, Man, His Origin and Destiny." This statement makes it absolutely crystal clear that, number one, the apostles are perfectly aware that evolution is taught at BYU, and number two, they nevertheless declare it as false and do not want us to believe in it. We must not be gulled by the ridiculous argument that we ought to believe evolution merely because it is found among the curriculum at BYU. It is a deceptive argument promulgated by the biology faculty at Brigham Young University, who are seriously out of line with the teachings of Jesus Christ. It is also logically fallacious because that same reasoning would require us to believe every theory taught in every class of BYU because, hey, it's BYU. The quality of this reasoning is so low that it's hard to believe that men with PhDs would actually resort to it. Unbelievable. It makes one wonder if they are deliberate in their deception, or are they really this thoughtless? In 1992, the Church contributed to a multi-volume project with the approval of the First Presidency called the Encyclopedia of Mormonism. With Daniel H. Ludlow as editor-in-chief, it was published by Macmillan Publishing, with Brigham Young University having been given the responsibility for the encyclopedia's contents. The authors, both LDS and non-LDS, were suggested by the Board of Editors and were cleared by the president of BYU, who at the time that this was in its planning stages was Jeffrey R. Holland, and by Macmillan. The article on evolution, unfortunately, written by William E. Evanson, is both short and troubling, and we're going to examine it. It says, "The position of the Church on the origin of man was first published by the First Presidency in 1909 and stated again by a different First Presidency in 1925. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, basing its belief on divine revelation, ancient and modern, declares man to be the direct and lineal offspring of deity. Man is the child of God, formed in the divine image and endowed with divine attributes. The Scriptures tell why man was created, but they do not tell how, though the Lord has promised that he will tell that when he comes again. In 1931, when there was intense discussion on the issue of organic evolution, the First Presidency of the Church, then consisting of Presidents Heber J. Grant, Anthony W. Ivins, and Charles W. Nibley, addressed all of the general authorities of the Church on the matter, and concluded, upon the fundamental doctrines of the Church we are all agreed. Our mission is to bear the message of the restored gospel to the world. Leave geology, biology, archaeology, and anthropology, no one of which has to do with the salvation of the souls of mankind, to scientific research, while we magnify our calling in the realm of the church. Upon one thing we should all be able to agree, namely that Presidents Joseph F. Smith, John R. Winder, and Anton H. Lund were right when they said Adam is the primal parent of our race. The first portion of the article is correct and essentially refutes the doctrine of evolution, at least as far as the lineage of man is concerned. If man is the direct and lineal offspring of deity, and the child of God formed in the divine image, then he cannot logically be in the lineage of animals. Things get troublesome in the second paragraph, where the door is left open for theistic evolution, or the idea that God used evolution to create mankind. It is also technically false, for the scriptures have told us how man was created, as indicated in the first paragraph. Two first presidencies have assured us that the church, using the scriptures as its basis, declares man to be the direct and lineal offspring of deity. This means that there is a genetic relationship between God and man, and that man was born into the world as a child of God. We can't really claim that the Lord has given us no information about how we were created without denying the scriptures and these origin of man statements by two first presidencies. The next blatant inaccuracy is the use of the Joseph Fielding Smith B.H. Roberts controversy as a statement, quote, on the issue of organic evolution. But as already explained earlier in this presentation, it was nothing of the kind. Neither Elder Smith nor Elder Roberts believed in organic evolution, and neither of them advocated for it. The controversy was actually over pre-Adamites and the age of the earth. So this is a complete misrepresentation of the 1931 controversy. It was not about organic evolution. It was about something loosely related to it, but it was not about organic evolution. This is false. It's not true. William E. Evanson, this is incorrect. Taken together, this short statement is a subtle bundle of lies, ignoring completely the large corpus of writings and statements against evolution from prophets, seers, and revelators, and not addressing the complete dearth of pro-evolution statements from such authorities. It is written with the express intention to excuse those who would wish to believe in evolution. Just take a look at the unfortunate selection in the author of the article. William E. Evanson is a physicist, BYU professor, and administrator, and an evolutionist, of course. He has the distinction of co-authoring the decidedly pro-evolutionary Mormonism and Evolution, the authoritative LDS statements, with fellow LDS evolutionist Dwayne E. Jeffrey. This is the same Dwayne Jeffrey that Ezra Taft Benson criticized as a liar and an apostate in his 1977 BYU talk cited earlier. The editorial board for the Encyclopedia of Mormonism made the fatal error of entrusting Evanson with authorship of this very important article. Evidently, since Evanson was an important administrator in the hierarchy of BYU and a scientist, they felt confident that the article would be in competent hands. But Evanson had about as much honesty and integrity as his friend Dwayne Jeffrey, and the same secular axe to grind. What an unfortunate mistake. Furthermore, the preface of the Encyclopedia of Mormonism states, lest the role of the encyclopedia be given more weight than it deserves, the editors make it clear that those who have written and edited have only tried to explain their understanding of church history, doctrines, and procedures. Their statements and opinions remain their own. The Encyclopedia of Mormonism
is a joint production of Brigham Young University and Macmillan Publishing Company, and its contents do not necessarily represent the official position of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. In no sense does the Encyclopedia have the force and authority of Scripture. Next section and last section, into the 21st century. So we have some more recent statements relating to evolution. The 21st century has likewise seen its share of statements against evolution. For instance, the Origin of Man document was reprinted in the February 2002 Ensign with a preamble declaring it to express the Church's doctrinal position on these matters, that is, of questions relating to the creation and evolution theory. President Boyd K. Packer had continued his opposition to evolution theory, repeating some of his earlier objections in a 2006 Women's Conference talk entitled Children of God. He said, "No lesson is more manifest than that all living things do as the Lord commanded them in the creation. They reproduce after their own kind. They follow the pattern of their parentage. Everyone knows that. Every 4-year-old knows that. A bird will not become an animal, nor a fish. A mammal will not beget a reptile, nor do men gather figs of thistles. In all that you do as women, do not forget that we are all children of God. If you get that doctrine in place, with that rule established, it will serve you well in times when you are confronted with those who equate humankind with animals." President Packer also included anti-evolutionary statements in a church-sanctioned article prepared for a special 2008 Ensign issue all about Jesus Christ. He wrote, "We are taught in Genesis, in Moses, in Abraham, in the Book of Mormon, and in the Endowment, that man's mortal body was made in the image of God in a separate creation. Had the creation come in a different way, there could have been no fall. If men were merely animals, then logic favors freedom without accountability. How well I know that among learned men there are those who look down at animals and stones to find the origin of man. They do not look inside themselves to find the spirit there. They train themselves to measure things by time, by thousands, and by millions, and say these animals called men all came by chance." Elder D. Todd Christofferson has also made his opposition to evolution apparent in the October 2010 General Conference and commented on the eroding effect it has upon moral values. He said, "Those who believe that our bodies are nothing more than the result of evolutionary chance will feel no accountability to God or anyone else for what they do with or to their body. We who have a witness of the broader reality of premortal, mortal, and postmortal eternity, however, must acknowledge that we have a duty to God with respect to this crowning achievement of His physical creation." President Thomas S. Monson had stated several times his opposition to scientific theories which cast doubt on the veracity of scriptural creation accounts. He repeated the following quote from Stephen L. Richards. Remember, the one who for a time tentatively approved of evolution, then changed his stance? During BYU speeches in 2005, 2007, and again in 2009, after he was president of the church. He said these several times very much the same thing, and it goes like this. "Should doubt knock at your doorway, just say to those skeptical, disturbing, rebellious thoughts, I propose to stay with my faith, with the faith of my people. I know that happiness and contentment are there, and I forbid you, agnostic, doubting thoughts, to destroy the house of my faith. I acknowledge that I do not understand the process of creation, but I accept the fact of it. I grant that I cannot explain the miracles of the Bible, and I do not attempt to do so, but I accept God's word. I wasn't with Joseph, but I believe him. My faith did not come to me through science, and I will not permit so-called science to destroy it." And remember, that's him quoting Stephen L. Richards. As for President Russell M. Nelson, he has not been silent either. Before his time as president of the church, there were occasions in the 21st century where he spoke out against evolution.
There may yet be other moments like those too after this video is posted. We'll see. The following is an excerpt from an interview with Elder Russell M. Nelson in May 2007 by the Pew Forum on Religion and Public Life, a major religious research organization. So the Pew Forum asked, different denominations deal differently with questions about life's origins and development. Conservative denominations tend to have more trouble with Darwinian evolution. Does the church have an official position on this topic? Russell M. Nelson, we believe that God is our creator and that he has created other forms of life. It's interesting to me, drawing on my 40 years experience as a medical doctor, how similar those species are. We developed open heart surgery, for example, experimenting on lower animals simply because the same creator made the human being. So that's an explanation of why there's a similarity, by the way, because there's a common creator, not a common ancestor. And he goes on, we owe a lot to those lower species, but to think that man evolved from one species to another is, to me, incomprehensible. Pew Forum, why is that? Russell M. Nelson, man has always been man. Dogs have always been dogs. Monkeys have always been monkeys. It's just the way genetics works. And so a lot of people say, oh, you're denying science when you don't accept evolution. But here we have a world-renowned scientist, Russell M. Nelson, and he doesn't buy it either. And he's saying the same things that I'm saying about it. And so don't be fooled by those who would try to shame you and make you feel stupid for not accepting their fairy tale theory of macroevolutionary change that they can't even demonstrate. And in 2012, Elder Nelson ridiculed the idea of the Big Bang Theory and the concept that life came about by such a chaotic explosion. He said, anyone who studies the workings of the human body has surely seen God moving in his majesty and power. Because the body is governed by divine law, any healing comes by obedience to the law upon which that blessing is predicated. Yet some people erroneously think that these marvelous physical attributes happened by chance or resulted from a big bang somewhere. Ask yourself, can an explosion in a printing shop produce a dictionary? The likelihood is most remote, but if so, it could never heal its own torn pages or reproduce its own newer editions. And that was back in April 2012. The New Era contains an October 2016 article called What Does the Church Believe About Evolution?, which, as of November 2020, is the first hit when evolution is searched on the church website. The article begins with the definite statement the church has no official position on the theory of evolution, and adds, nothing has been revealed concerning evolution. What are we to make of this? The article seems to take its cue from David O. McKay's much-advertised private letter to Professor William Lee Stokes in 1957, and much advertised, of course, by the evolutionists in the church who wish to depart from the scriptures. In declaring that the church has no official position on the theory of evolution, it allows the less committed to retain their membership despite dissension over a fairly peripheral matter. And of course, there are no revelations on the subject of the process or theory of evolution per se, but it is as plain as day that there are multiple already existing scriptures and revelations that contradict evolution and therefore invalidate it as a concept. So of course it's false. Look at what the scriptures teach. Look at what the prophets have taught over and over. We're completely committed to believing that the scriptures are true and that therefore evolution, since it contradicts them, it must be false. Yes, church members are free to believe that evolution is true. They're free to hold all kinds of radical opinions that do not line up with the scriptures or the teachings of the prophets. Some of these result in church discipline, others do not. But freedom to believe in or do something does not equate with rightness to believe in or do such. The faithful will see that Darwinism conflicts with the scriptures, the teachings of the prophets, our identity as children of God and descendants of deity, and the plan of salvation, and they will reject such things as fallacies. Articles such as this are a mere spiritual crutch for the less faithful to continue their existence within the church. So, conclusion. It is not true if someone tries to convey to you the idea that there has been a great variety of opinions on evolution among the prophets, and that one view is just as credible as the other. There is a definite trend. So let's take a look. Number of apostles and prophets who have indicated that evolution is definitely false. If we go through this presentation, at least 40. That's a lot. And here's their names in order of appearance that they've shown up in, basically in order of appearance that they've shown up in this presentation. At least 11 of these prophets said or had statements published that were distinctively anti-evolutionary or otherwise hostile or doubtful towards evolution while serving as president of the church. And if we expand that net a little wider to just take in for account things that deny, death before the fall and, things that conflict with evolution theory, I think all of them would fit in that category as well. But I'm trying to be a little bit conservative here. Number of apostles and prophets who indicated that evolution may be true. Just two. Just two that we were able to find. Stephen L. Richards, who changed his mind and later wrote against evolution, and this was on the convincing of fellow apostle Joseph F. Merrill, who was a scientist. And Richard L. Evans, who used an inspirational quote that was pro-evolutionary, but significantly altered it to remove much that would show approval of evolution. Number of apostles and prophets who indicated that evolution was definitely true. So green light on evolution, how many? 0. Not a single one. Not one of them. Now, if I was an evolutionist in the church and I was looking at data like this, I would begin to feel very uncomfortable about my position. Hopefully, this does the same to you if you're in that boat. And I don't want you to feel bad about yourself. I want you to love yourself. But I also want you to love the scriptures and love the message of the Lord and get on board with the truth, right? I mean, the truth is in the scriptures, not in Darwinism, not in the fairy tale of changing from one kind of animal to another and mutations doing things they've never been observed to do, and unverified postulations about how old things are supposed to be, and you can't actually check the answer on them, and all kinds of weak fallacies like that. Let's come to an understanding of the truth from the source of truth, the Lord, who has given us the information in his scriptures. We can drink from the fountain of truth. So let's not deny anymore the fountain of truth in our search for answers about our world. On any other doctrine, if the prophets had been this consistent, it would likely be easily identified as false and rejected. But the love for the false theory of evolution reigns supreme in the hearts of liberal Mormons, unfortunately. But you think about it, like Joseph Smith said that angels don't have wings. Okay, so that one statement seems to be sufficient to settle for now and forever in the minds of Latter-day Saints that no, angels don't have wings. But how many times is it going to take from statements from prophets and apostles that evolution is false before we're going to get on board with that?
before we're going to accept the truth? How many is it going to take? The tenor of the prophets and apostles' teachings on evolution have been clearly shown to follow a very pervasive and obvious pattern. They absolutely and unmistakably trend toward denouncing evolution. There has never been a prophet, seer, or revelator which openly proclaimed that Darwin's theory of evolution is true. Never. There have been a myriad of times, however, when such watchmen on the tower have proclaimed evolution to be false. And this is in public and official venues of the church, in addition to non-official channels. There have been a few perceived departures from this pattern, but each of these have been explained and shown to have little or no bearing on the overall picture. A few, and very few only, have given ambiguous or neutral statements, but never positive ones affirming evolution. And when I'm talking about ambiguous or neutral statements, I'm talking specifically about the 1910 Improvement Era article, purportedly to be by Joseph F. Smith, but we've basically demonstrated that it absolutely is not written by him, was not written by him. And then also Stephen L. Richards' article to college students, where he left the door open for evolution, but later changed his mind on the matter and criticized the theory to a great degree when he was in the first presidency. And such ambiguous or neutral statements are very much the exception and are very greatly outnumbered by those which have denounced evolution. So it's not even close. It's not even close. It absolutely tips the scales against evolution completely. Likewise, the venues in which such ambiguous or neutral statements are given are not to be compared with the official capacities such as General Conference of the Church or official declarations from the First Presidency, in which evolution has been regularly preached against. In fact, the teachings of the prophets are so overwhelmingly against evolution that no serious consideration can be given for sympathy toward the theory from God's servants, his prophets. If the axiom that the prophets will never lead us astray is correct, and that the majority of the brethren will never be on the wrong side of a major issue, then we must see that evolution is untenable for believers in the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's the end of the presentation. I apologize for the length. It was very long, but hopefully it was very informative and very useful for you. Thank you so much for watching and taking the time. If you watched the whole thing, thank you very much. If you watched parts of it, thank you. And thank you very much, my friend. God bless you.